response to the JW that
Yeah.
you wrote out there. And more I read it, well, a number of times, trying to figure out what in the world is going on between you two.
Yeah. Usually what I do is I put people's responses in there,
Yeah.
but that first response that I did, I put all my information in there, like where I find things, and
Yeah, yeah.
so that people can go and check it out.
Mhm.
Well, I didn't know, but on YouTube, if you do that too much, they'll just wipe away all of that conversation.
Mhm.
Why?
So that, because it's spam. They say it's spam.
Oh.
And so I posted that to, because it's our YouTube. I posted that, and then I went there the very next day to see if there was a response, because there was a response. It was completely
I
gone.
know you mentioned that.
Yeah.
But how was it JWs that like to throw monkey wrenches in, you know, like as far as the names of God? That one lady said there's over 1,000 names for God.
Yeah.
Like, are they just coming up with stuff, or?
So no. So when you read through the scriptures, there's over 1,000 names of God in the scriptures. Yeah. So we usually use, just because in English it's just God. But you have the Lord, which is in English, the Lord is, it's the covenant name, so it's Yahweh.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's done in a different way, it's Adonai. Then we will just put in like God for things like El Shaddai, Elohim, El Roy, El Gabor.
Mm-hmm.
There's all these different names. The reason why is because, good evening everyone.
Hi.
So the covenantal name of God is what God gives Moses in Exodus 3,
Yeah.
in Exodus 6. But the relational names of God is throughout the rest of Scripture.
Mm-hmm.
So when someone has an encounter with God, they'll actually give him a new name. So the word El is just God. It's like the English general God, and then the descriptor comes after it. So God of whatever that is. So mighty God is El Gabor. That is. So Gabor is mighty. God is El. So El Gabor. Where Hagar meets the Lord, she says, he is the God who sees. So it's El Roy, God who sees. And so those are relational names. And God never denies those relational names, because that's how he engages with us on a personal level. He uses the I am that I am, the Yahweh, because that is specifically for covenantal use. So it's a different, it's like if you ever do a contract, at the very top it will say, here are the two parties that enter into this contract, right? Mm-hmm. And then it will say something like, from now on, this party will be known as this, and this party will. So if you think about it in that way, that's what God's doing. He says, we're entering into a contract. My name that you will refer to me as is Yahweh. And so so you have to think of it in that term. So by elevating that name to a point where your whole theology, and this is the problem with Jehovah's Witness, their whole theology is wrapped around this idea of this is the name, and any other name is not the name. It's like, well, Jesus himself calls himself the Son of Man. Like he just gave himself a title, right? Just by allowing us to call him Jesus. And Jesus is just a transliteration of, it's from Latin, it's from the Hebrew, so his name is actually Yeshua, which would actually be more properly Joshua. But the name Jesus it's that relational name. This is who he is with us, right? And so if you go into a different language, so if you go into Spanish, his name is Jesus, right? So if you're in a different language, should you use the English form? Well, no, you would use
Yeah.
how it translates into. So that mindset of, well, it has to be the same. Well, Jehovah is a translation out of Hebrew, you know,
Mhm.
pretty far down the line too. So wrap your theology around that. That's a tier 4 issue, because that's nowhere near what we're dealing with. And so that's the issue that's going on.
Honestly.
Yeah. So, if you want to know more about that, we did it on Jehovah's Witness. Anyways, so we're going to get through this whole packet tonight, because this is our last night for the Apologetics class, because a lot of people are leaving. So we're going to get through all of this. Usually I end before Easter. Easter is a week early, than usually a week to 2 weeks early. So we're going to have to bulldoze through it, because I have to start preparing for my summer stuff, which is a Bible study on Wednesdays. So I will take April off, and then I get into our summer stuff. So I'm going to pray, and then we're going to get started. All right? Heavenly Father, thank you for this evening. Thank you for the beautiful weather you've been giving us. You've truly blessed us down here. Lord, as we're getting into the last of these worldviews, may we honor you with our discussions, with our thoughts, and that we take this information not to have information for information's sake, but that we would utilize this when the time comes, that the Holy Spirit would bring it to mind, that we may be able to share the gospel in a better way, more concise, maybe better targeted, if we want to use that, but just being able to know more and to be able to share with those that hold these positions. So Father, I just ask that you move by your Holy Spirit to accomplish all that you would have for tonight. I ask this all in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So we are covering, we're going to be covering 4 worldviews. Okay. So I'm hoping to give a half hour to each of these worldviews, so we'll be done in 2 hours. Okay. So if at any time you're like, that's a little too much, I'm done for the evening, you can leave. I'm still going to talk. If everyone leaves, I'm still going to get it done, because I have to get it done for the video so that it's all done. So we're going to start with atheism. So we're already talking, just a real quick recap. I get just a real quick recap. So in last week we talked about theism and this concept of an open world, our open system, and this is creation, and this is an open system. This is important because you're going to see a step away from that idea. So what this means, this open system idea, is that God can do stuff inside, so miracles. So God creates the universe, and he creates it in such a way that he can actually interact with it and manipulate it to do as he wants. So usually people aren't raised from the dead, right? That is a standard. But because it's an open system, God can actually raise someone from the dead. It would be the same thing if you're, in a sense, if you're a computer programmer and you know your program so well that you can actually change some code or use the code within there to change some diameters or to accomplish something in the computer program. In that sense, God can do the same thing with us. So even though he uses things, some laws like math, right, and physics, he can still do things within it because he knows the system and he can interact. So he can raise Jesus from the dead. Jesus can walk on water. He can part the Red Sea. He can do all these different things because it's an open system. Does that make sense? Okay. So from there, we step down, or we step away, and that's just a mosquito hawk. He's just looking for mosquitoes. So deism is the next step. And this is a semi-closed system. It's going to be in the notes, and if you read like a book on this, it's just going to say a closed system. I would say it's a semi-closed system, where this is an open system. This is a semi-closed system. What this is God created and then has either zero or close to zero involvement with the creation, depending on the deistic view. But basically, God created and then left it to run on its own. Kind of like the description that's always used is a clock. So God wound up the universe and then let it go on its own. And so a deist will say that either God doesn't interact at that point, or very minimally, and usually on big world events. Okay? This is a closed system. I would say it's a semi-closed system because God still can interact. He chooses either not to or very limited. All right? So I would say semi-closed. Last week, we moved into this realm of these other worldviews under what's called modernism. And these worldviews basically start in the 1700s and move on even in today. The focus is on the natural world. So the natural world. And where this is an open system, this is a semi-closed system. Under modernism, it is a fully closed system. The reason being is because God doesn't exist. Okay? It's only the natural world. And understand the difference here. We're saying this is creation, that's creation. Under the modernist worldview, it's the natural world. It's just what's there. Okay, does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. Under modernism, you have different smaller worldviews. The one we talked about last week is agnosticism. Okay? Gnosis meaning knowledge, ag meaning to question. Okay, so agnosticism. And this is just a question, or the statement, I don't know. Alright? So an agnostic asks the question, does God exist? Would just say, I don't know. They don't feel like they have enough information to make a choice between if God is true or not. We talked about how there are basically two different agnostics. You have the believing agnostic, believer, and then you have the non-believer. What this means is, when asked, the agnostic will say, I don't know, but I tend to think he does. The non-believer, or the atheistic, would be, I don't know, but I believe that he doesn't. Does that make sense? Like, I tend to believe he doesn't. So if you ask an agnostic and you press them on the question, they'll say, well, I hope he does. Or I don't think he does. That's how you know a better understanding of where someone holds. So I have made the statement that you can probably figure someone's belief system out within like 4 or 5 questions. And it starts with, do you believe in God? And if someone says yes, already you have pushed out the agnosticism, atheism, and everyone that we're going to talk about tonight. Okay? So just by that one question, do you believe in God? They'll say yes or no. Or they might qualify it. I believe in many gods. Okay, so now That might be Hindu, right? So just by asking that one question, do you believe in God, you can start, you've already taken out a lot of belief systems, worldviews. So agnosticism, because an agnostic say, well, I don't know. As soon as an agnostic, someone says, I don't know to that question, you already know they're agnostic. If someone says, I do not believe it, they might fall into one of the ones we'll talk about tonight. Atheism, nihilism. Okay? And so if they say, yes, I do, the next question is, do you believe in the Abrahamic gods? I do. Okay. So now they're not polytheists, they're monotheists. And there's only 3 Abrahamic faiths: Christianity, Judaism, Islam. And so you can ask, what do you think about Jesus? He's a prophet. That's Islam. He's God, Savior. That's Christianity. He's maybe a good teacher, but that's about it. That's Judaism. 3 questions, and we've already got somewhere with people. So that's why I say within 4 to 5 questions, you can figure out what most people believe about God, their worldview, by just asking them, starting with, do you believe in God? And so understanding that, you can really better talk to someone. You know, because if you know that they have an agnostic belief system, then it becomes, okay, let's talk about that. Why don't you know? What evidence would you need? Things like that. And so, but an agnostic will tend to believe that the world is a closed system because they're under a modernist worldview. And modernist worldview is just, if you just want to take it as this, is a rejection of anything that cannot be scientifically proved. Okay? It's all about the natural world. So, a modernist will say, well, you can't trust the miracles in the Bible. Why? Because we live in a closed system, therefore they can't happen. So a modernist will say, so we have to explain it away. So, how did the Red Sea happen? Well, if it did happen, it was probably because around that time there was a volcano up in Greece, in that area, in Crete, and so that happened, and that would affect Egypt. That's why you have the 10 plagues, and that's how you would explain it using modernity. Okay, so that's all this idea, because it's a closed system. God can't interact. So God couldn't have brought the 10 plagues. It had to be a natural phenomenon. And so that's basically just what we talked about last week, just to help us get to this point of understanding of the modern worldview. From here on out, we're going to talk about atheism, and that will be the last modern worldview that we talk about, and then we're going to go into another overarching worldview called postmodernism. And that's, every time someone asks a question, I think we kind of asked it last week about why do people today deal with some of the stuff, and the question can continue, transgender issues, why are young people so weird, you know, it's because they're postmodernists. So all of you in here grew up in a modern worldview. Like, even though if you accepted Jesus, it was still under a modern society worldview. That's every time you went to school and you learned about any subject, it was under a modern worldview. Because our society went from a pure theistic worldview and over time brought in modernism, the scientific method, things like that. And we moved, so theism can actually work within a modernist worldview. So anytime, like on Sunday, my sermon's going to be a modernist way of approaching the empty tomb. It's argument based. Where if you come to the sunrise service, you're going to get a more postmodern approach to the scriptures, which deals more with the heart. And so even though because Christianity can work within these other worldviews. Yeah, so let's get started. Atheism. Any questions so far? I'll just give you guys some crash course in it. All right. So Richard Dawkins, he is one of 4. They're not all alive now, but at the turn of the 21st century, you had a group of atheists called New Atheists that were called the Four Horsemen, and Dawkins was one of them. And so, in The God Delusion, he writes, "We are all atheists about most of the gods that humanity has ever believed in. Some of us just go one God further." What that means is, I brought this up last week, is that on a scale of 0 to 100, on the question, does God exist? That's dose.
D-O-E-S.
There we go. Right? D-O-E-S. Sorry. Does God exist? What Richard Dawkins is saying is, depending on where you line up, that is if you're an atheist or not. So if you're at 100%, you believe God exists, you are a believer. If you are at 0, you are an atheist. Right? If you're somewhere in between, you can be an agnostic. In this particular thing he's saying is, the Hindus believe in 300 plus 1,000 gods. The Christians believe in one God. The atheist believes in no gods. So what he's saying here is, I just believe one less God than you. It's not a good argument because to get you from here to here is a huge leap. Because in order to believe in one less God, you have to go from a open system to a closed system. You have to go from a supernatural influence to no influence whatsoever. The two are completely opposites. And so you can't really say it's just belief in one less God. No, it's a major shift in worldview. But so let's go through it. So we define everything and then we move further along. Do we have?
Oh, good idea.
Yeah, I don't know if we have any more.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry.
You better be.
I'm sorry.
Here. We're married.
It's mine. It's yours. All right. So in Greek, so the word comes from Greek, right? It just means godless. Okay. It starts being used really in a modern sense, meaning in the modern world, in the 1500s. Now, understand this. In the ancient world, Christians were called atheists because they didn't believe in the pantheon of gods. And so the Romans would say, well, you guys are atheists because you don't believe in all the gods. Christians were saying there's only one true God. And they say, well, you're atheistic. You're godless. You don't have all the gods. And so the term begins, so we talked about last week how over the course of time we moved from the Renaissance into the Enlightenment into the modern age. And words like agnostic and atheist start being used from their original intention into the modern intentions. And so agnostic originally meant skeptic. Just anyone could be a skeptic. You can be skeptical about anything. And so you're just agnostic in that sense. You're skeptical. In the modern sense, it was the I don't know if there's a God. That's how it changed into the modern sense. And the use of atheism in the ancient world, it was just you were godless to all of the gods. In the modern sense, it's you are completely godless. You don't believe in anything godly, anything supernatural. You don't believe in anything that does not fit within the natural world. Okay? The dictionary definition would be a person who denies or disbelieves the existence of supreme beings, a supreme being or beings. Now, I don't think that's the best definition of atheist, and so this is a modern way of saying this. I have to write fast, Kelly.
It's okay.
So the definition I like better is this one. A person who doesn't believe in any supernatural world or phenomenon because it's the natural world. If you just say they don't believe in a supreme being, that's really restrictive because that's not what people like Dawkins say. Dawkins just doesn't hold to that idea. It's the idea that there's nothing outside of the natural system, which begins to propose problems when you start going through where does our natural world come from. Because within a closed system, everything has to be eternal. It has to be completely able to recreate and recreate. A while back we talked about how science has disproved that. That with Hubble back in the 1930s, he proved that there was a beginning to our universe. And so you have to have something before then, something that's timeless, spaceless, and immaterial to bring about the time, space, and material world. What I have found with atheists today is they deal with that by saying, well, we might be in a matrix, or there might be aliens, or there might be the many worlds theory, that in a universe that creates many worlds, our world was created, and that's the only way it could be done. And so that's why we're alive. And so they try to get around this by talking about a closed system, but you're always in that closed system. Where did the aliens come from? Where did the matrix come from? You just push it to another dimension. Where with God, the material world is around time, right? We experience time, we experience space, and we experience matter. So in order to have all those things, you have to have something outside of those things creating those things. That is timeless, spaceless, and immaterial. And when we look at the Christian God, what is he? Timeless, spaceless, and material. And so, so he is eternal, right? He is omnipresent. So eternal is timeless, omnipresent is spaceless, and then what was the last one? This last name.
Material.
Immaterial. He is spirit. Okay, so you see how that works? Like it fits within the concept. Theism fits all what we actually see within our natural world. So, but going back to our definition, this is what an atheist is. Someone that it's only about the material world. There is nothing supernatural, nothing outside of that closed system. Okay? All right, so here's some history. Now, we don't cover everything because I covered it in the agnostic and the modern side of this, so this is more concise. So just saying, walking hand in hand with the progression of modernism, atheism was a natural step in rationalizing the world without, world around us without God. What that means is, I don't know if it's in your guys' notes, but there is a picture, and I know it's coming up. But once you get to this point, okay, so let's walk through this real quick. You have creation, right? So God creates, he's there, so you have this theistic idea, open system, everything, right? So why is the world around us here? God created it, okay? Simple answer, right? You get to the deist says, well, God's not interacting with us a lot, right, if any. So he must have created the world but does not involve himself in it. Do you see the step away? Mm-hmm. Okay? God creates and is present. That's called personal. He's a personal God. To God creates, but he's not personal because he's not directly interacting with us. Okay? That step from theism to deism. Then you get to this point of, okay, well, if we say that God isn't interacting with us, does God actually exist? That's agnosticism. You see that progression? Then, in the modern world, we get, well, it's a closed system. We can figure everything out through science. We don't need a God to explain anything. So, the natural progression is there must be no God. It's answering the agnostic's question. Well, there just must be no God. You see the step? God does exist and he interacts on a personal level. God exists, but he doesn't interact because I don't feel him every single day, right? He doesn't have a physical body, so therefore he must not be here. He must have left. To, well, does God really exist then? And then the final step is, no, he does not.
Well, because we know that God is working, saving souls, and seeking the lost.
Right. So that the theist would have a response to that. But what we're looking at is just the progression,
Yeah.
how that goes.
The thing I was trying to get at is, therefore, the atheist doesn't even believe in salvation at all then.
No, you can't. Because that would be a completely outside the box thing. Outside of the closed system, yeah.
Yeah, most scientists actually would say, like non-believing scientists would say, that God is not a concept that science can actually entertain.
Right.
Because you can't measure it, you can't,
Right.
you know.
And it's true. So science cannot measure God. It can only measure the effects that God places. And so it's true. A good scientist will say we can't know God through science. We can only see if there's an effect by God in science. Right? Does that make sense? Okay. So going from there, so this is that step down. Okay? Without a personal God, deism. Okay, so deism does not believe in a personal God. One question the very need for God, which is agnosticism. Okay? And with the only thing humans can interact with being the natural world, God can be completely dismissed, which is atheism. This is that step away. So as soon as, and this is what's interesting. Within the scriptures, we get this test. And it's a test, what's interesting, it's about the Gnostics, of proto-Gnosticism. Those that question, are those not questioning God, but the physicality of Jesus. Okay, that's what the Gnostics did. They questioned Jesus coming in the flesh. What's interesting is, in a sense, deism does the same thing. It questions the personalness of God. Because Jesus has to be a personal God to come. When we say John 3:16, for God so loved the world, that's personal. That's relational. And so if God isn't personal, then he can't come as Jesus. Does that make sense? Because he's not personally involving himself in the world. He just created it and let it go. And so once you get to that point, you've taken away the personalness of God. You can get to atheism really quick. And so that's why we have to see this movement. As soon as you get rid of the personal God, you're flowing right towards atheism because God can't involve himself. Right? Okay. So the basic beliefs of atheism is very simple. Is there a God? No. Okay. Is there an afterlife? No. I mean, it's very simple, right? So no God, no afterlife. There are two types of atheism. The first one, the first one is just atheism. It's just, that's it. So it's people that don't believe in the supernatural. So someone that says, I'm an atheist, and you say, okay, what? So you don't believe in the supernatural? No, I don't believe in the supernatural. Why? Oh, because science doesn't prove that God exists. Okay, that makes sense, right? Because if your worldview is modern, you live in a closed system, makes sense, right? And so, okay, that's one type of person. They're just atheists. You're not going to have a lot of problems with them. They'll be open to talking with you. They're just nice people that don't believe in God. Okay? The other group is called anti-theists. And this group are the Richard Dawkins, the Sam Harrises of the world. They're the ones that not only do they believe that atheism is true, they are evangelistic in their wanting to make sure you believe that atheism is true. And so what's interesting is we're going to get to this thing called existentialism. And in existentialism, you create your own reality, basically. And if you listen to some atheists, they'll say, well, God doesn't exist, and so therefore we must create our own purpose in life. Well, the question then becomes, well, if I can create my own purpose, what gives you the right to tell me that my purpose is wrong? Right? If I choose to believe that there is a God who exists, you can't tell me I'm wrong, because it's just as right as any other belief system, because it gives me purpose. This is where that little thing is what moves us into postmodernism. That little tiny thing of purpose takes us from the natural world under modernism to a to a postmodernist world where purpose becomes important. Because it's just that one idea of purpose that is big stuff. So, the 7 questions that every single worldview has to answer, we're going to talk about that in the atheist. Now, if you get a chance, if you weren't here last week, you need to see how deists answer this question, how agnostics answer this, how atheists, then nihilists, then existentialists. You need to see how each of these groups answer these questions, because they add a little bit more to the questions. I'll try to show that through as we answer these. So, what is prime reality, the really real? As a believer, as a Christian, I would say God, right? God was eternal, and then He creates. So He is prime reality, meaning He was the original. Okay? And so when you step away, deists still hold to that. Right? Deists hold to God is prime reality, He creates all things. You get to agnostics, and they would say, I don't know. But it's probably the natural world. See how it's just that I don't know if it's God, but well, I can see. The atheist then takes that and says matter exists eternally and is all there is. God does not exist. So it's one of those steps. Okay?
Again, disproven by Hubble.
Right, yeah. This would be disproven by actual science. So, the next one, what is the nature of external reality, the world around us? As a believer, I would say it is creation. Right? That's the reality. Now, moving all the way down to atheism, we have moved beyond that. The cosmos exists as a uniformity of cause and effect in a closed system. So we would say that it is an open system. If you want to get technical, it is an open system that God created and interacts with. That would be the Christian answer to number 2. But you've moved away from that now that you're under atheism, and all that you have is a closed system. From here on out, the closed system is the way it's going to be. Because once you get into that closed system, you can't get out of it without going to a theistic worldview. That's why it's such a radical change for a lot of people.
But if the system is closed, nothing can get in
Right.
or out.
Right.
And if it can't get out, then why is it winding down?
Well, there's a lot of issues, and we're going to take the philosophical route, not the scientific route, because it's the philosophy that actually affects why we don't just have atheism. There's still more. So what is a human being? Human beings are complex machines. Personality is an interrelation of chemical and physical properties we do not yet fully understand. In theism, what is a human being? It is a image bearer. God created humans to bear His image. Deism, they are image bearer, but they are mechanical, because we're moving away from that closed system. Here, once we get into the modern worldviews, they're just machines. That's all we are. Because there's nothing that influences us, right? Because in theism, it's God who influences. But here, there's no one out there, so it only has to be machines. Okay? Number 4, what happens to a person at death? Death is extinction of personality and individuality. Because it's all in the natural world. There can't be anything. So spirit cannot exist. Right? Because that is a open system type of idea. But you're only in the closed system, so spirit can't exist. So everything that you do is just neurons firing. That's it. Right? Number 5, why is it possible to know anything at all? The study of the world around us, because there is only the physical world, all we need to do is study nature to understand everything. So this is the very modern part of atheism. We study the tree. We know how it works. We study the animal. We know how it works. Therefore, we can reproduce those things. That's all there is. What's interesting is this question is actually one of those hinge points from the modern worldview into the postmodern worldview. How can we know anything? It's a huge question. And so when we get to our postmodern, you'll see how this one question actually poses a huge issue. Right? So, how do we know what is right and wrong? An atheist might say ethics is related only to human beings. Now you might say, well, I know people that will say, well, we can see it in the animal kingdom. There is that, but now you're moving into a postmodern idea that we can look for other things. But some atheists will say we see it in nature. And so where do we get ethics in nature? This is in a couple moral debates that I've watched, and I have interacted with atheists who will pick up on this. The idea of, well, we see it in the natural world. In fact, I don't follow him, but for some reason he's always on my timeline on Twitter and or X. And they just posted this thing that they're like, I can't remember how many they said, all these different animals have homosexual relations. It's only in humans that are homophobic. And what that idea is, it's this. Ethics, morality happens in the animal kingdom, therefore we should implement those things into the human race. People like that don't think through what they're saying, because if you ever watched a lion or a silverback gorilla, like, they'll beat the living daylights out of you and kill you. They'll eat you. Like, that's the animal kingdom. Like, do we want to have a society like that? We do. All right. We are. That is our society right now. What is the meaning of human history? History is a linear stream of events linked by cause and effect, but without an overarching purpose. Now, there's two things that are really important in that answer. Because first, this comes into the question of machines. So, if you're here, right, and you're just a machine, this is how we get from modern ideas to postmodern ideas. If you're just a machine, and the reason why you're like the way you are is because of a string of determined ideas, right? So you are, why do you have the color eyes you do? Or the hair color? Or the height or whatever? It's because of your genetics, right? Going back. And so in my family, my parents both have green eyes and brown hair. And I come out blue eyes. Why? Well, because somewhere in the genetics, right? My sister, on the other hand, is blonde. And I thought she always got it from my mom, because my mom was always blonde. I didn't realize that she died. My mom dyed her hair. You know, like it threw me for a loop as a kid. Threw my dad for a loop too because she was a redhead when they first met. So really threw him for a loop. But so that's the idea, right? That we're just determined to be who we are because of a series of cause and effect that came before us. So the question of purpose is huge that we now have to deal with. Because if we're just machines that have no purpose, we're just a linear cause and effect. And so this goes back to, I don't know if you've ever heard this, where a person will commit a crime and they said, well, I'm just a product of my environment. The whole nature, right? Nature versus nurture comes from this idea. What actually makes us who we are? Is it because we were naturally that way? Because of a series of our families? And so the serial killer, he's a product of his genetics. He can't stop himself. Or is it nurture? Is it because, well, the environment around him caused him to be that way? So this idea is a very closed system idea. It's the modern idea. How do we get to this point? But the problem with it is purpose. And so when we go into the next one, we're going to see that. Here's that picture. So I don't know if it's in yours or wherever it is. But this was actually done back in, I believe, the either really early 1900s or late 1800s. And what it was is you start at the top, Christianity. And then you go from Bible not being reliable to not made in God's image, to no miracles, to no virgin birth, to no deity of Christ, to no atonement, to no resurrection, to agnosticism, and finally down to atheism. So this is what they saw back in the late 1800s, the turn of the century. As all this is going on, they're saying this is what's happening. And so they saw the descent of the modernists. And so that just kind of gives you, like, this isn't something new. It's not something that the church hasn't seen, but it's not something we talk about because it's so old.
It's progressivism in a way, so I mean, we do talk about it, just maybe different.
So progressivism will actually fall under the next worldview because it is. If I was able to redo this, there would be more because that's not where we are. We're past that. Okay.
Atheism is the modern, right?
Right. So all of this is still modern. It's still under this one overarching worldview that houses other worldviews underneath it. Okay? It's kind of like theism houses other religions.
So
Go ahead.
it's as if all those viewpoints under modernism just left people with no hope, and so they decided to find hope on their own.
We're almost there.
Sorry.
No, but that, yes. So that's going to be a huge thing because, so we'll talk about the overarching and then we'll talk about where this goes. Okay? All right. So, but before we get there, what can the Christian take away from the atheist? So we talk about a challenge in our own lives from other worldviews. That's what we're talking about. Not that they're right, but rather how can we be challenged to be better believers? Okay? The first one is the desire to know more. Well, I think that's the only one. The desire to know more. Atheists, every time I've encountered an atheist or an agnostic, they will state something like, I just want to know truth. They are Pilate in front of Jesus. What is truth? Okay? And so, we should desire to know more, right? Like, one of the things I try to say is that when people say things like, heaven's going to be boring because we're going to get up there and just sit on clouds and strum harps. It's like, one of the things about heaven is it's an eternal state of being to know an eternal being. Like, we're going to learn eternally about the eternal God. How long does it take to learn about an eternal God?
You'll
In
never
eternity.
get bored. You'll never get bored.
You'll never get bored because there's always something to know about the Lord. And so that's heaven, is an eternal experience, a new experience. And so where atheists will say, I want to know more, I want to know more too. The difference is you're confined to knowing only this realm.
Yeah.
I want to know the big realm. I want to know the eternal realm. And so I want to know Jesus because that's who I have to go through to know everything. So if you really want to know truth, you have to meet the person who is truth. That's Jesus. And so that's one thing that we challenge in our own faith. How can a Christian reach out to an atheist? So a lot of atheists have been hurt by the church. Like, very rarely will I meet someone that has not been hurt by Christians in the church. Like, it's usually, well, when I was younger, and it'll be things as simple as, I prayed that I would get this and I didn't get it. So they've been hurt, right? And that's where a lot of this comes from. There's a lot of hurt. The reason why you have the new atheists around the turn of the 21st century is because of 9/11. Those four guys became very prominent because of the Muslims, hijackers hitting the Twin Towers. Like, that's why they started pushing atheism. Because if this is what religion is, we need to eradicate religion. Like, that was the mindset. So Dawkins has talked about this. Harris has talked about this. This was their motivating factor to start becoming evangelists for atheists. And so religion hurt them, therefore, I'm going to hurt it back. Like, that's the idea. So they've been hurt by God in some way. That's the idea. And so first, we should be praying. Like, you can argue with people all you want. Nothing will happen. And so the place that we have to go to is, because we have the spiritual, right? Like, we have God. And Paul says that our battles are not against flesh and blood. It's done in the heavenly places, right? So we know that. So why should we battle just with arguments? The battle begins on our knees before the Lord. Like, that's where the battle begins. And so that's where we start. Is, Lord, I have this person I just met. They reject you. They say they're an atheist. Prepare my heart. Prepare my words. Prepare me for the Holy Spirit's work. And prepare them. And if there is any spiritual battles that are going to happen, I want to be ready. So, Lord, I need the whole armor right now. And so it's preparing in that sense. And then we need to share and show how God is working. So earlier it was said that they don't believe, right, that Jesus is saving. They don't. And yet, how are so many Muslims that have no access to Christianity having these visions? How is it, like the story of the missionary going into the tribe, and he spends so much time trying to learn their language, and when finally he is able to share the gospel, they tell him, we already believe in him. We just didn't know his name. Like, why are these things happening? Why is it that we have more people healed in this church just by praying for people than not? Like, if I gave you like the actual statistics of it, it's way higher that we see people healed than people not. You know, and so why is that?
That was almost going to be one of my questions with the atheists, how they're always leaning on scientific facts of what they can see by matter and the things in nature. They say that we can learn everything by what we see, but there's clear evidence of miracles everywhere. There's miraculous things happening everywhere, and unexplainable things. And I just wonder, do they just convince themselves that there's an answer and they just haven't found it yet?
So, like we talked about how there's a progression this way, there's a progression back. The question becomes, how do you know? Right? So one question I'll ask an atheist is, do you know everything? And when I really go into this is, do we as a species, do we know everything in the universe? And the answer is no. Like, anyone that's not a jerk is going to answer that question truthfully, right? Do we know everything? No. Okay. So this is where, okay, say follow me then. Like, just follow my thought process. Okay? And this is where we have the arguments of God. So the arguments of the existence of God. And we've already talked about some of these in this. So one, you could say, okay, there are a bunch of different ones. I'm not going to go into all of them. There's a kalam. There are things like the cosmological. Okay. I'm just going to give you the one. It's called, now I forgot what it's called. But it's just, we'll call it Goldilocks. That's not what it's called. Because this is fine tuning. There we go. Fine tuning. Okay. So the question is, and most people have never thought about this, but our planet, right? So here's the sun, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, Uranus, and sometimes Pluto. Okay. Yeah, sometimes.
Where are we?
We're right there. Third rock from the sun.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So, fine tuning. We're in this perfect place where we have this big ass giant and this meteor belt, right? Right? I'm going to the astronomer over here in John.
Oh, the asteroid belt?
Yeah, we have the asteroid belt, right? And we have this big thing called Jupiter.
Yes.
And as things come through our solar system, Jupiter, along with this belt, are keeping things away from us, basically.
It's a shield.
Yeah, it's our shield. Then on top of that, we have this thing where it's a really cool like animation when they do it. We have this electromagnetic field that if you've ever watched Star Trek and they have shields, we have that. And so this thing's going out of, this is the Earth, by the way, out of the Earth, and it's blocking things coming at us as we hurl through the solar system.
Yeah, in fact, people, space travelers, astronauts, they can be exposed to very dangerous levels of radiation if the sun suddenly has an outburst.
Right.
I mean, they have to control that, how long they're up there.
Right. And then, you might have heard this, we are the perfect distance to where any closer to the sun, atmosphere would break.
That's the Goldilocks.
Yeah, the Goldilocks zone. Any further, we'd ice over. But did you know, not only are we perfect in our solar system, but in our universe, or in our galaxy, we're on the perfect spot in our galaxy. Any closer, and we would just be crushed. Any further, and we fly off. We are in the perfect spot. This one argument is why atheists have gone to the Matrix argument. to the many worlds argument, to the aliens argument. Because it's too perfect. If one of these things was true, there are tons of planets within this Goldilocks zone, right? But none perfectly.
And yet, they accept, like, for example, this matrix or extraterrestrial intelligence maybe created us somehow.
Right.
They accept that based on no evidence.
Yeah, no evidence. Right. Yeah, so, but this is just one of those things. So this is a modern way of doing things, going through arguments, okay? This doesn't work with everyone, especially a postmodernist. We'll get to that.
I was just thinking that too. It takes a lot of faith to believe that we're in the Matrix or.
In fact, there's a book called I Don't Have That Much Faith to Be an Atheist by Frank Turk that
Because
deals with this very idea.
Even because I've looked into the alien stuff because my brother is such a believer in them and I want to be able to talk to him about those things and we have no real physical evidence.
No.
Just hearsay, just gossip. That's all it ever is.
And if you ever look at where they are, they're in the U.S. and Western Europe.
What's that, the science, the group that was here last winter?
Creation.
Creation? They have a video, I want to see it, that
Creation.
addresses aliens.
I've got it.
Have you seen
You
it?
want to borrow it?
I'm just going to
So
download it
good.
online and watch it, but.
Yeah, it's
What?
so good.
One thing I'm realizing is that every argument, every approach that I have with these people is in the modern viewpoint. I didn't realize how caught up I still am in that viewpoint, which is explains why John Morcady at work, where I never could reach. Yeah,
Because he was outside of the modern viewpoint.
he was outside of it.
And that's what we'll talk about now.
What was that number one you had up there?
Oh.
You're erasing now.
Yeah, Kalam?
Oh, the Kalam argument. Okay. So there is a series of what's called cosmological arguments. The Kalam is just one of those. It's everything that put me on the spot. Everything that begins to exist. It's three parts. Everything that begins to exist. How's it go? Everything that begins to exist. Everything that begins to exist has to have a cause. The universe has a cause, or the universe has a beginning. Okay, I got it right. Now it's been driving me nuts. Okay, so one, everything that begins to exist has a cause. So everything that begins, this is important, begins to exist has a cause. Two, the universe began to exist. Three, the universe has a cause. I'm not remembering this exactly right. Basically, the idea is, okay, so we're talking about the beginning of the universe, right? So, so the question is, what's the cause? Okay, because the universe has to have a cause, and so for God. See, this is where I'm not getting. I think there's one above this. It might be here. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. God does not begin to exist. It's something along this line. God created, what's created? We actually go through this in our basic beliefs. It's been over a year since I really thought about this. So God created universe. It's something along those lines. There's, like, I'm not getting it right.
If the universe has a cause, then an uncaused personal
There you go.
creator of the universe exists who sends. Without the universe is beginningless, changeless, in
Yeah. So this is, yeah, this is, so when I was saying that God is spaceless, right? Spaceless, timeless,
Yeah, spaceless, timeless,
And
immaterial, enormously powerful,
yeah.
and changeless, beginningless.
So,
And then
Yeah, that
the
would be
fifth
timeless.
is therefore an uncaused personal creator of the universe exists. The universe is beginningless, changeless, immaterial, timeless, spaceless, and enormously powerful. I don't know where that comes in.
yeah, it doesn't, because that's not the true column. That's someone adding into it. So the idea here is everything that begins to exist has a cause. God does not begin to exist,
Oh, I read it wrong.
therefore no cause.
It was talking about
Right.
God, it wasn't.
The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. God, who is spaceless, timeless, and immaterial, created the universe.
Mhm.
That's kind of the idea. I'm sorry I don't have it exactly the way it's done. So that's the column, basically.
You had all three, the first three perfect, but then
Yeah.
the fourth one's so big.
Yeah, well, because, so the original column is a little different than the modern apologetic column. But it's one of those arguments. I like the fine tuning one because it's easier.
The last one.
All right. So let's go into postmodern. All right.
I like that statement, all truth is relative, and then accept this one. So if somebody says it's all relative,
Yeah.
you just say, well, is that true?
Yeah. Yeah. It's
You know,
one of those dumb things. So Jean-Paul, I can't say the last one. Sartre. He wrote, "Life has no meaning. It is up to you to give it meaning, and value is nothing but the meaning that you choose." Okay? This actually goes all the way to existentialism. But, so we're starting right here in postmodernism, all right? So, postmodern is the next little over. So, postmodern. Modern. Okay, so the dictionary definition is any of a number of trends or movements in the arts and literature developing in the 1970s in reaction to or rejection of the dogma, principles, or practices of established modernism, especially a movement in architecture and decorative arts running counter to the practice and influence of the international style, encouraging the use of elements from historical vernacular styles and often playful illusion, decoration, complexity. All right, so you're gonna write that whole thing?
Nope, I just wrote down reacts, rejects modernism.
Yeah.
That's all I could tell.
So basically, the idea is you have the modern idea. So that starts really with the in full bloom in the late 1700s. Okay, with the Enlightenment. Okay, and then into the 1800s, it's in full swing. You have it up to, and I would say even a little bit before this. Okay, so they say the 70s. I think the 70s is when it explodes. Like that's when it starts really gaining ground. I would say it's more right after World War II. Like that's when it really starts making its way, and we actually see this a little earlier into academia, and then when it gets to the populace is in the 1970s. Because in the 1960s, what do you guys have? The sexual revolution, you have the hippie movement. All of those are actually coming from the postmodern world. Okay? So, but if we want to just give it a time, I would say at least the 1960s. Let's just say Elvis. Okay? That's when it started. Okay? Because, I mean, think about this. What did rock and roll do? It challenged all the music before, right? Like, there's a whole new world when rockabilly came on. All right. Here's my definition. It's a little simpler. I say a rejection of the status quo of organized anything. Right? The man. Right? The hippie movement, we got going against the man. All right. So this idea of, okay, so the modernist world is a construction. If you look at buildings, let's take, name a building. Do you guys know any buildings that were made in the late 1800s, early 1900s that are still around? Maybe in a big city? You know, maybe like the Empire State Building? Okay, what does the Empire State Building look like? So,
Oh, I don't even know what it looks like. Something like
right?
Mhm.
Very straight,
Mhm.
very like boxy,
Square.
right? Have you guys seen any more modern buildings? They'll be like, right?
Yeah.
The egg one in London.
Okay. The ball here in Phoenix, or in Vegas, right? Have you guys seen those?
The egg and all that.
Okay. These weird kind of designs, right? And if you really think of this, so if we put this into perspective, so this is in the early 1900s, right? This is more of the 2000s type. Do you guys remember before this the type of architecture? Like,
pyramids?
that's a little further.
Very ornate.
Very ornate, right?
Yeah.
Very beautiful, Gothic. You go into a cathedral and it just, wow, how could they do this with, you know, without modern technology?
And chisels.
Yeah. But then you go from this beautiful, you know, intricate work to cubicles and grays and it stifles the imagination, right? And then you get now you have these crazy things, right? And they can be very beautiful. Kind of weird too. But so postmodernism is, you have modern, like, everyone walks the same way, everyone dresses the same way, everyone does the same thing. And the postmodern says, no. Basically, if you can think of it like that, it's a rejection of this stuff. Of everything that you say, I hate about modernism. Postmodern says, I want to reject that. Okay? So, if you can begin to think of it like that, then you kind of understand how we go from a modernist to a postmodern world. Okay? So, the history of postmodernism, so we just call it the road. It started in the high academia halls of universities where philosophers questioned the absolutes of the modern and pre-modern ages. Last week, the God's Not Dead line got brought up, and I talked about Nietzsche. And Nietzsche, where that comes from is this allegory, this kind of modern parable type of thing that Nietzsche does. And in it, you have the insane guy. And what happens, the way that he describes it is basically this guy looks out of, just out of his mind. He runs up to this group of men and they represent the modern man, right? The atheist modern man. And this guy's a lunatic. And he grabs onto him and he's like, where's God? Where's God? And they're laughing at him. They're like, oh, did you lose him? Maybe he's over there. Maybe he's over there. And he goes, and it's in the moment, and this is Nietzsche's commentary on the atheistic modern worldview, which moves us into postmodernism. He goes, no. God is dead and we have killed him. And what Nietzsche is saying is, when you lose God, right, we the modern man have killed the idea of God. What becomes of society? And philosophically, that is the question between modernism and postmodernism. In a world without God that the modern man has created, what becomes of us? Remember how we talked about purpose? That is the issue that postmodernists want to deal with. Now, we'll see how that's dealt with. But they start questioning things like absolutes. So when we as believers, we talk the absoluteness, right? So God is absolutely good. They would say, how do you know? God is absolutely powerful. How do you know? Those things. Questioning absolute. Why do we have a border? That's a modern concept, right? We have borders to protect. We have borders to keep us secure. Why? That's a challenge, right? A challenge to that idea. Why must we create buildings like this? Why can't we create buildings like this? It's just a challenge to the idea that this is the only way of doing things. Okay? That's what it means by absolutes. Okay? All right. So, continue the road. Academics began to question the belief that humanity could know everything through scientific experimentation. So the Christian can go to the atheist, right? Okay, so let me put my atheist in here. The Christian can go to the atheist. Oh my goodness, how did yeah. And we could ask that question, right? Of how do you know? Right? That postmodernist is asking the exact same question. How do you know? How do you know that we can know everything through just science? Right? That's just a good question. The theist can ask that question. The postmodernist is asking that question. Okay? Continuing down the road, the trickle-down effect first made its way into literature and music. So I was just listening to a podcast about banned books around the world. There's a book written, what is it, I don't know when it was written. It's between 1920 and 1950, I know that. It's called Lolita. Has you ever heard that book? There's a reason why. It's from the perspective of a guy who's pursuing a pubescent girl. Okay, like that's the purpose of the book. Anyways, this is a postmodern world. It's a book because it's trying to break down the idea of social norms, social constructs, these types of ideas. Things like Lord of the Flies. Have you ever read that book? It's breaking down these social ideas. That's a postmodern worldview. And so when you have these kind of, back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, when you have these radical ideas and people are like, this is satanic, that's postmodern. Like when it was coming about, when people like the church would say, well, that's satanic. Okay, that's postmodern because it's challenging everything of the modern world. And so the hippie movement, right? Free love, drugs, right? It's because in the modern world, you didn't do that. Why? Because the modern world was still being influenced heavily by theism. The church was still strong because theism worked very well within a modern worldview. But now you have a challenge, not just to the modern worldview, but everything that comes before it. So theism, deism, any type of thing. And because Christianity says absolute truth, modern says absolute truth, postmodern says you're all wrong. Okay? And so, so through music, so if you ever listen to the Beatles, right? You listen to their music and like their early stuff is just like, pop, very, very fun, and then you get to their like late 60s, 70s stuff and you're like, Walrus. Yeah, Yellow Submarine, it makes no sense. That's postmodern influence. It's thinking of the psychedelic, right? It's because now you can reach that higher state of consciousness, So at the same time this is going on, you have a flow of Eastern ideas into our culture. So now you have like Kung Fu movies, right? And Buddhism and Hinduism, they start coming into the culture. So now, okay, Christian, the Hindu also can speak in tongues. So how can you be right and they're wrong? Like, that's the postmodern idea. And so all this stuff is happening when we start really seeing that. That's when we really start seeing in the 70s. So when this says it starts in the 70s, that's what it's talking about, is this real cultural things. All the philosophical stuff started late 1800s into the 1900s, but the impact into our culture is really in the 70s. So today, the postmodern mindset is overwhelmingly in youth culture. And, I mean, all of you in here were of a modern background, at least a basis. Now, if you went through the hippie movement, those movements, you slightly shifted into the postmodern, but you're still very modern. My generation is completely postmodern. This is why if you ever ask the question, what's wrong with this generation? They're postmodern. Like, that's the reason. Where anyone from the 1960s and before was pure modernists. Anyone from the 60s onward to the, I would say, mid-80s, you had mostly modern and some postmodern. You get into the like 80s, 90s, today, purely postmodern. Like, there is no doubt, postmodern. That's why you have all the different things that are going on. Why do we challenge sexuality? Like, in the 60s, it was just, 60s, 70s, it was just, oh, free love, you know, we can do whatever. Now it's, no. You can't say anything against transgenderism, against homosexuality. Why? Because it's just as valid as any other gender. Because we have rejected absolutes. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And
So
so,
total rebellion against any absolute.
everything. The only absolute is there are no absolutes.
It's chaos.
You're right. Okay.
Confusion.
Yep. What we're in today.
Do they recognize it as darkness?
No, because what's going on is just how many of you guys ever thought growing up, I'm a modern?
Yeah.
It's the same thing. Until you actually take the time and go, what is this? You're never going to realize it. So for me personally, I'm a millennial because apparently they keep changing the dates. So before I wasn't, now I am, so whatever. I've had to relearn, right? And that was only done through Jesus. Like, because Jesus has an absolute standard, and I say, well, I'm going to conform to that because he saved me, I want to serve him, he has absolute standards, so now I'm not a postmodernist, because Jesus. Like, and it's the same thing if you're a modernist. Like, you need Jesus, just like a modernist needs Jesus, just like a postmodernist needs Jesus. Because in a modernist, it's all about science, it's all about what's here, what's in front of me. And Jesus is like, no, there's more. Shakespeare said it in one of his plays, there's more to heaven and earth than is thought of in your, what is the last part of it? It's thought in your philosophy or something like that. Can't remember. Anyways, we're not getting through this as fast as I'd like. All right, the first question, postmodern's address is not what is there or how we know what is there, but how language functions in construct of meaning itself. What that means is, why do we call dogs dogs and cats cats? Is there a reason? No, that's just what we call them.
Adam started in the garden.
Yeah, well that would have been Hebrew.
Yeah.
But that's the idea, right? Why do we call these things, why can't we call a dog a cat? Like, that's the postmodern idea. It's an arbitrary thing. Shakespeare actually said, right, a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. That's the postmodern idea. We could call it, flange weed. It would still smell good, right? That's the idea. And so, in other words, there has been a shift in first things. Okay? Shift in first things. There is no longer a sense of being able to construct meaning from outside sources. Rather, we learn how our language constructs our meanings. So why is it so important for someone who is biologically male, but transitions to female, to be called woman? She.
Is it because what they speak they view as truth?
Yep. Because truth is only what we make it ourselves. So that's why someone that goes through the transgenderism, they have to have you say what they believe. You have to call them what they believe they are, because that's their truth. You might have heard that word. Yeah. I'm just living my truth. That's a postmodern concept of language creating reality.
Yet they do not respect your truth.
Because
They don't respect the absolute truth.
well, it's both. So because there's deeper things. Now as believers we can go, there are spiritual issues behind all of this, and it is. Remember, we are battling a spiritual battle. But you have to remember where we're at. We're in a world, even the postmodernists will say we're still in this world, this closed system world. So we have to create, and this is where existentialism will come in at the very end. You have to create your own meaning. And so this just gives you an overview of the whole thing. Okay? But this is where it comes, the language.
Today I was listening to somebody a Christian, it was on the Piers Morgan, and the guy that's gay that they have on there a lot, and I know they do because he's argumentative and he's not afraid to speak up. It caused controversy. They like it. They keep having him on there. Well, they brought on a Christian, and the argument that I noticed, he doesn't have an argument. When he's trying to shut somebody down and he doesn't have an argument, and I've heard other Christians say this, but it stood out to me so much that he just says, where's the love? Where's the love?
Right.
Where's the respect? And they took those words and weaponized them. Instead of it actually being from a place of love, saying, where's the love? Where's the love? It's a weapon now. And I don't even know how to approach that to get them to understand the lie that they have.
Because, well, what it is, it's language. So you can redefine language. So he's redefining what love is.
Oh, okay.
And then
Yeah,
using
that's
that.
true.
Because the Christian has a definition of language.
Because
of
there's a
love.
standard of love that we have to abide by, that God has
Right.
boundaries for us.
But someone from a
Okay.
postmodern worldview has a different definition of love, which is an absolute tolerance and acceptance.
Yeah.
So that it's
Their form of love is, if you don't agree with what I'm saying, then you're not loving
right,
me.
and that's
Right.
the difference.
Okay.
That's why we have to understand worldview in order to better
So we
present
need
the
to
gospel.
stick with the argument that, no, I'm loving you by being
Well, that's-
truthful. By,
So it goes beyond just that. It's, tell me your definition of love. Like, let's be honest.
yeah.
You tell me your definition of love. Let's walk through that idea. Like, that's the apologetic. Because as we'll talk about, postmoderns want interaction.
Mhm.
Where a modernist will be like, no, this is just how it is, shut down. Our postmodernist actually wants to have these discussions, but they want someone to actually validate
Yeah,
that.
Tony said that we should be, instead of going to the argument of the quick answer, which we already know, we should be asking them questions
Right.
to get their response, because then we can
Right. So
get
what
them to, instead of putting a wall up, we can
right.
talk.
So what I always talk about is the best apologetics are questions, like asking questions,
Okay.
not just, oh, you're an atheist. Oh, this is my answer to what an atheist is. No.
Yeah.
In a postmodern world, conversation is more important than answer. And so we have to get the conversation going so we may get to the answer.
Help them work it out in their
Right.
own mind.
This is what we do as counselors too. So the death of truth. This is a part of it. The truth about reality itself is forever hidden from us. All we can do is tell stories. So you might hear things like narrative, meta-narrative, that type of language. What that means is there are stories of how things happen. So a meta-narrative are just big stories. So what's the meta-narrative of the U.S.? Well, some people say it's a meta-narrative of slavery. And it started in 1619. And they'll say that's the narrative of the U.S. And you might go, well, no, it started in 1776 with the document. No, that's a different narrative. That's the narrative. And some people will say that's the narrative you want to believe. But this is the true narrative. And so just stories are big. It's a big thing. That's why I say communication is really important with the postmodern. We have to have communication. Language is power. As believers, we believe this. Like, language does have power. God created the universe through His Word. James says, tame the tongue. Like, there is a, and what you'll see is there's a hint of truth in all of this. But this is what I was talking about. All narratives or stories mask a play for power. This is a huge thing. Why is it that we've been talking about systemic racism and systemic misogyny? Why do we talk about that right now in our culture? It's because of narratives create power. So this is where all that stems from. It stems from this postmodern idea. That's why it's talked about in our society right now. That's why it's on the lips of every young person. It's because of this. And meta-narratives are oppression. And if you go after someone and be like, well, that's not true, that's not history, but it's the story that's told.
What's a meta-narrative?
It's a big story.
Okay.
That's all it is. It's the story that is the true story.
According to who?
To the postmoderns.
So that was my question. So a meta-narrative, it might be your truth, but it's not necessarily.
No. So what it would be is, what is the story of the U.S.? Let's do that. What's the story of the U.S.? We had people back in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. And after that, we had pilgrims come over, right? And they settled the land, they became colonists. They bought, they fought, and they stole land from, or they took land, however you want to say it, and created the 13 colonies. And then in 1619, they brought slavery over, right? That's when we had slaves. And then in 1796, we had the Declaration of Independence, we had the Revolutionary War, then we have the Constitution, and now we have the U.S. Basic, right? Try to be as basic as possible. So that is the story, the meta-narrative of the U.S. Now, if you were going to talk to someone who is a postmodernist today, they would say, actually, it started with the indigenous people. And we only say that other story because the white guy, the European, wanted to take land, power, away from the indigenous people. And so they created the meta-narrative of Columbus discovered the Americas. You see how that works? Mm-hmm. So it's an emphasizing of something over something else. And the emphasis is how was power taken from someone and given to someone else. That's meta-narratives.
What's so frustrating though, is this has been happening since day one, and it's all God. If He says you can go over here and conquer this land, you can, or He commands people, go conquer this land, it's yours now. And He gives to whom He wants to. He's always done it.
Okay, but see, that's going off course because now you're trying to do a different narrative.
Well, it's all about God.
Yeah. This is what I'm trying to help you guys understand. This is what it is. So when you hear on TV, someone's like, well, it's systemic racism. It's because that's a meta-narrative that they're saying that's the true narrative. The meta-narrative of, no, there's no systemic racism is because they're trying to oppress people. Like, that's where this stuff comes from.
So if you told postmodernists that the Indians were not Americans, then would they accept that as?
You would have to really explain that, because I know what you're saying, because of the land bridge, no one is native to the Americas,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right? But that's not something that's taught in modern schools, or modern, you know what I mean, like today's schools.
I could see an acceptance beyond postmodernism. It's like, well, then what's so bad about oppression?
Okay, so that's actually
Why is it
where
wrong?
we go. Like, that's existentialism,
Yeah, okay.
which works within the postmodern worldview. Yeah. So, all right. So language is power. Meta narratives. These are the types of meta. You want to give like more definition, or you know, like these are where narratives happen. Religions. So Christianity is a meta narrative. Theism is a meta narrative. That's the idea. Okay. Because. Go ahead.
So they personally have no meta-narratives?
No, they do.
Okay, because it
Yeah,
sounds
yeah.
like they don't like any meta-narratives unless it's their own.
Okay.
They only like their story.
Yeah.
They don't like any other story.
Because remember, who creates reality? Who creates truth?
Right.
Personally, right? And we're actually going to see this. So in the postmodern thought, this is actually where atheism has to go. And we'll see this with nihilism. Atheism has to go into the postmodern world because the question of purpose, the question of absolutes is being questioned. And atheism either has to falter into it, and they do this through things like relative morality. So relative morality means your morality is okay for you, my morality is okay for me. That just lends itself to the idea of oppression's okay. Because the Nazis, you can't tell them that they're wrong, right? Because relative morality. So, but that's a step into the postmodernist that atheism does, and they try to hold themselves back, but they can't.
Yes.
And that's where it moves into the worldviews that follow this. But just real quick, cultural, political, moral, ethical, and social beliefs that present an absolute standard. If that is a part of the meta-narrative, it's already oppression. And so it can't be rejected because it has an absolute standard. Jesus is the only way. It can be rejected because that's an absolute standard. Okay? So it's the death of substantial self, right? It's the death of me. Human beings make themselves who they are by the language they construct about themselves. So as theists, we would say, no, we're made in the image of God. That person's made in the image of God. That person's made in the image of God. They are deserving of respect. Though they might do things that, capital punishment. So capital punishment is you did this crime, you will be punished, right? Okay? But that can be seen as a meta-narrative. That's an absolute. Right? So now, capital punishment is wrong because that's an absolute. And so, do you see what I'm saying? So those are the things that we're talking about. Now you're not an image bearer of God. One, because there's no God. Right? We've already done that. That's the natural world stuff. And you have to now create things by your language. So the idea of any one being, you need to respect them, that's an absolute. Right? So in Christianity we say they're an image bearer, they are deserving of your respect. That's a baseline. The postmodernists say, well, that's an absolute. We only create our truth. And if I call you a Nazi, that's what you are. Because you are a fascist because you want absolute truth. You see how that works?
So,
But that's how it works.
They formulate their reality.
Yeah, because they're creating this reality because this is their truth.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what you say. I see you this way, and that's the truth. And so That's why it can be so hard, so confusing to hear things and go, that doesn't make sense. It makes perfect sense because it's creating truth. It's creating reality.
So the definition of truth is gone.
Right. Yeah. So because there's no absolute truth, truth becomes nothing.
Right.
Right? Yeah. So being good without God, ethics, like knowledge, is a linguistic construct. Social good is whatever society takes it to be. So like, why did we have those back in the 2019, 2020, why did we have those places like in Seattle where there was no-go zones, right? Because they created their own little, I forget, Chaz or whatever it was. Because ethics or whatever the society chooses. So mob rule is okay as long as the society chooses it. And I don't know if you've heard things like this. So in our society, we have this thing called the Electoral College, right? And for most of you guys probably know that because you learned, about our society. But now they want to get rid of that. Why? Because society needs to choose. It's the popular vote. It's one of those. It's how these things work out in like politics and stuff like that. Cultural is cutting edge. The cutting edge of culture. Cultural change is literary theory. This can happen through books, right? Actual literature, but it can also happen in music and in movies. So you're going to have these really, they call them art movies, artistic movies. And if you ever watch one, you're just like, how is this even? There's nothing to it. There's just randomness, and that's because it's postmodern. It doesn't have to be. It's the challenge your mind. It's the think beyond the box type of stuff.
Remove talent from creation.
Well, and we talk about DEI, diversity, inclusion, DEI.
Oh, yeah. Diversity, inclusion.
Yeah, I agree with that. But that's something that's big right now, is this diversity, because that's destroying meta-narratives so that the oppressed can come in and be unoppressed. Like, that's the idea. It's very postmodern. The 7 questions would be answered like this. What is prime reality, right? The world around us is what we make it to be by language we use. So where we were going like, oh, it's God, natural world, to we create it. Whatever you want, it's language. It's just one of those things. You might go, well, that's dumb. That's the way it is.
So really, you are your own creator God.
So you want to take this back to the beginning, Genesis 3, and we would say this is, God knows that you just eat this and you can become like Him. That's what we were doing. We're becoming God. I have issues with this because it seeps into the church and things like, or in Romans, you read the scripture and it says, God speaks that which is not into existence. And you have Christians, people that claim to be Christians, that will say things like, they'll change the scripture. We speak that which is not into existence. And they'll change it. That's it's a demonic thing. But that is a postmodern idea. I can change the language because it fits me. This is how it works.
They use where Jesus said, and he who follows me will do greater things than me, like as if it's a free for all.
Yeah.
It's
And that's the thing, that we see these little hints, these little seeds within the Christian church of stuff like this. There was a movement a while ago, early 2000s, called it's called the Postmodern Church is what it was referred to as. Basically what they did is they took the postmodern ideas and said, okay, how can we engage postmodernity with Christianity, and it got really jumbled. There's good to it, there's bad to it, just like everything. But, okay, so next, what is the nature of external reality? Reality is created by a personal interpretation of a human. So it's all about the human. So this is extreme humanism. So last week I think we talked about, just real quick, about how theism, when we get to deism, it's a soft humanism. When we get to postmodernism, it's a full-blown humanistic. It's all about the individual human. So it's this mesh between very individualistic and very community-minded type of stuff. So, what is a human being? Human beings are what they choose to be by the way they speak about themselves. This is very transgenderism. And so, I've been talking about this for years. Like, this is where we're going. Language changes things, right? So you might go, why are we dealing with all this stuff because of this? I don't know if you know what MAPs are.
Yes.
Minor attracted persons. Yeah, those are called pedophiles.
Yeah.
But the language has changed. Yeah,
They're called maps now?
MAPs, minor attracted persons. And so let's change the language because that's not what they identify
That's
as.
disgusting.
It is. So this isn't something that's new. I've been teaching on this for 13 years.
I had no
Yeah.
idea.
This is nothing.
No idea how they were thinking.
Yeah.
I thought I did.
But this is the generations that follow. So what happens to a person at death depends on what we choose. Now this is something that's important for later on. This is because this is a broad topic. Remember, it's not about actually what happens, it's about what you think happens. That's all that means. But that's existentialism. I'm sorry.
I just hope my brain can make this leap. It's so far.
Yeah. Next one. Why is it possible to know anything at all? Human beings can only know things from only a subjective view. Objective means this is true no matter what. So that chair is there no matter what. Like, that's objective. Subjective is, like, we would say, how's it feel? Right? So when you sit down, you're like, oh, I like this, or no, I don't. This is very Goldilocks, right? Oh, it's too cold, it's too hot. That's subjective. So they're saying everything. Everything is subjective. There are no objectives.
The saying you can't regulate morality, but yet every law that exists regulates morality. So
Right.
that's the next step.
Yeah. Because morality is subjective.
So there's no law.
There's no law. Yep. Yeah, so view how they interpret the world around them. So it all becomes just what I think. Okay? How do we know what is right and wrong? Right and wrong is socially and culturally based through an agreed upon narrative that is not forced onto any one group and is subjected to the individual's interpretation. So this is why I said it's very individualistic, yet very social. So you can say as an individual, I don't like this. So, picture this. Someone says, and this actually happened, okay? This happened back in, I think it was like 2020 when all this stuff, all these different things were going on. All right, so this person, they're being interviewed. They were held up by two individuals with a gun. And they said, give us the keys to your car. And they're like, I don't have my keys. Because they were just walking. So they have their keys. And they told him, don't mess with us or we'll kill you. He says, I don't have my keys. You can take my wallet, you can take anything. And they just left him. They go on to go get someone else. Okay? So this person's being interviewed, and he says, which they did steal someone else's car. I didn't call the police because it was all during the BLM stuff. Because I didn't want the cops to shoot them. Now right there is a clash, right? Between the safety of other people, because those people went on to go and steal and harass someone else, and the idea that there are meta-narratives of cops killing young black men. And so, how does morality work in such a situation? Well, apparently for this guy, it was that the meta-narrative problem trumped someone's personal safety. Do you see how that works? So it's a social thing and an individual thing, and which trumps which at one point.
Really, it's an assumption.
Well,
It's
there's a lot of assumptions within all of this.
yeah.
Yeah. But that's, I just wanted us to understand that it's like, how does this, if you want to say it like this, matrix, right, this interweaving of things actually work itself out? It becomes very chaotic, which we see in our society, right? We see very much in our society this chaos because of all of this.
Well, there's something about in California, you're allowed to shoplift a
Yeah.
certain amount.
Up to $900 or $999, something like that.
Yeah.
Because because meta-narrative, people are oppressed. So what do they need? To be allowed to do this. That's the idea.
You're also allowed to kill a baby up to 28 days old in
Yeah,
California.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's another one of these things.
Born?
Born.
What?
No questions asked. Oh yeah,
yeah.
it passed a couple of years, a year or two ago.
Yeah.
Oh
In response to the Roe v. Wade.
yeah. Yeah.
So the next one, what is the meaning of human history? To learn from the mistakes of how meta-narratives have affected the world. So it's not about making ourselves better in the sense of growing godly or fixing the world, and it's the meta-narrative. We have to fix those. That's the problem. That's the issue. That's why we use language like systemic and stuff like that today. That's the purpose of these ideas. Okay? So it's all about the meta-narratives and fixing the mistakes. Okay. We're gonna run through this. What kind of Christian language is powerful and can shape our understanding of things? We, like I said earlier, we agree with that, right? Like we that is true.
Yeah.
How far that goes, though, right? So God says that His word will not return void, like that. So word is powerful, right? So we need to be more clear on what we say. Like, we need to be more intentional on how we actually compose our thoughts when dealing with people that have a postmodern worldview. Especially when you're coming from a different worldview. Like, if I'm talking to a teenager, I speak very differently than I talk to an older adult. My sermons are actually geared differently depending on who I'm talking to. Because when I speak on Sundays, most of the time they're very modern. Or what's called, another term that I would use is deductive. So a deductive sermon. It begins with a thought, and we walk through that thought. Where teenagers, you start inductively. Start with the story, and the story is the main thing. And then the punch is at the end. And so different ways of doing things. But knowing, so then you create, specifically, this is the language I'm going to use. It's not, now don't get me wrong, it's not watering down the gospel. It's not overlooking things. It's being more intentional on how I say something. We can actually see this with Jesus. He's very intentional with the Pharisees. He's very intentional with the disciples. You see it with Paul. He's very intentional when he talks to the Jews, and he's very intentional when he talks to the Greeks. And he does it different ways. So with Paul does with the Jews, he starts with Abraham. But with the Greeks, he starts with creation. He understands what they understand, and so presents the gospel in a way that they'll understand it. It's the same thing we have to do. We have to be very intentional with how we approach it when we and just by seeing someone going, they look over the age of 40, they're probably more modern. Or someone under the age of 40, probably more postmodern.
Recognizing your audience.
Right, exactly. One of the first things in public speaking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's being very sensitive to the needs of the sheep.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, from a ministry standpoint, it very is. So you have,
And then what does he say, that God is, to the meek, you show yourself meek,
Yeah.
to the, so
Yeah.
you're, with your different people you're talking to, everyone is different, we all learn differently,
right,
understand differently.
yep, exactly. Here's another one, we need to live out our faith. This is really important. Remember we talked about creating reality, like the words create reality? A huge thing is how you actually live your life is very impactful. So someone who says, well, Christians are just jerks. What do we need to overcome that? We need to show that we're not jerks. Like, we actually have to put where before you could argue someone into the kingdom, like with a modernist, if you could hit that moment of aha, a modernist would go, oh, I get it. With the postmodernist, I want to see it in action. Don't tell me something's true. Show me that it's true. And so with teenagers, if you probably have experienced this, they know when someone is being untruthful. Right? They see hypocrisy. Where in the modern worldview, it was very separated. Right? We separate, here is church, here is work, here is family, and we act accordingly. Right? In that sense. And the postmodern is I want to see it that Jesus influences your Sunday morning, it influences your Monday morning. If this is real, if this meta-narrative is a true meta-narrative that isn't oppressive, I want to see it in action. And so it's a huge thing. Being honest and open, and this is, I messed up, I did this, is huge with postmoderns.
It's not necessarily bad.
It's not.
So-
Yeah, so it actually challenges the church to become the way this was explained, a movement a while back was called incarnational ministry. And the idea there is to be Jesus to people. Like, that's what it meant. Like, that was the idea behind it. It's just, the idea of WWJD, that is actually an early form of how to reach the postmodernists. Like, that really is. It's a really, like, we were doing things as a church trying to figure out how we reach this younger generation. And we see need and we do things. And that's one of the great things about the church. That's why I say it can work within any of this stuff, because the truth of God walks us through all the problems of humanity. And the modernists grabbed hold of this one issue and they just held on to it. And then the postmodernist says, that's not right. And they held on to this other thing. And Jesus is over there, both of you are holding on to idols. That's the issue.
So someone who comes to Christian faith from the postmodern worldview, do they learn differently
Yeah.
than we do? Like if you were holding a Bible study with a group of postmodernists, you would actually teach that Bible study differently,
Yep.
even though they're already believers.
Yep. So, Sunday morning, right? You go to Jim's class. That is a modern approach to biblical study. Maybe you were here in the summertime. So last summer we actually did a postmodern Bible study. They didn't know, the group didn't know this, but it was very devotionally based, rather than like and the reason I did it for them is because they were older believers, and so they had the knowledge, and we needed to do the devotional side of it. That's why we did it. But just the idea of, look, it's for someone who is a new believer, they need a way to understand the scriptures and be taught, this is how you study, and be very clear, this is study, this is meditation, this is how you pray, right? You're very intentional about how those things happen and why. So why do we, like, Lord's Prayer, what is that, right? And so it has to be broken down. So the reason why Jesus tells us to pray like this, right? He doesn't say pray this, he says pray like this. There's recognizing God and His blessing. There is asking for need. There is talk about the spiritual side, the war, right? Deliver us from evil. And then you get back into praise at the end. And so it's so when we pray, that's kind of the outline of our prayers. And so that has to be explained. And most postmoderns want that. They want an understanding, not just, hey, you need to pray. Hey, you need to read your Bible. I don't know how. Why? Remember, they're coming from that idea that I can create truth. And they have to get to that point where they trust Jesus as absolute truth. And so if you don't explain the gap, I don't understand. You know.
So most churches now are coming from a modernistic point of view. That would explain one of the reasons why we don't see any young people
Right.
in those churches at all, why we're graying.
And you know what's really interesting about that is there's a church back east, and it is so old school. There's no drums. It's all a cappella. It's done in a very high church, so very like I think it's Episcopalian is the building, and at one point it was the fastest growing church among young people, and it was because one there was no show. It wasn't showy, because that's kind of where we went, right? As a church, we went to show. That's how we get the young people.
Trying to draw.
Yeah, that's how we do it. The postmodern wants substance. They want what is it about the bread and the cup? We just do it, right? It's one of the reasons why when I get up there and I do communion, this is what it is. This is very, and it's different. Yeah, but I try to bring out different aspects of communion, because to a postmodern mind, I want to know why. Not just it's there, I want to know why. And so it's a different approach. And what's really interesting is you watch these big churches that are really good biblically based. Yeah, there's some show to it. They'll do it. But those teachers come up and they're teaching like the word. And they're teaching. It's not preaching. It's like I went to this one, it's called Bayside, and the guy, he stutters, he has Tourette's. Or, not Tourette's, he has
Tourette's.
Yeah, he doesn't have Tourette's, but he can't control his movements. Yeah.
Parkinson's.
Not Parkinson's, no. It's can't remember what it is. But he has this TV screen and he just puts the verses up there. And he actually, a couple weeks ago I did my
Polio?
I did my show you how to study.
Yeah.
He does that every week with his congregation. And there are people with gray hair in there. There are people in their teens in there taking notes. So it's not like the church has to be like, okay, how can I water down the gospel? No. The church has to be more intentional. And just not be like, okay, well, we're just going to throw up a really cool, smoke machine and that's not what the postmodern wants. That might be fun.
Good, because they're tired of that.
Right.
And so.
But they won't even be attracted to the church in the first place if they don't see Christ being lived out in their lives.
That's why it's so important for the church, the people, to actually live it out. Yeah, it's huge. You'll never get someone in the door if the people aren't actually living it out. And the postmodern can actually see that. It's huge. It is, I'll tell you this. We are living in such a time that should excite us as the church, because our world is getting closer and closer to the time of the founding of the church, where it's post-Christian. In our case, it's post-Christian, where they were pre-Christian. And there are going to be opportunities to share the gospel unlike anything I've ever seen. And in fact, there was a poll that just came out, I think it was done by Christianity Today, that showed right now in Gen Z, right, the young guys, the ones that are like late 18s into their early 20s, like that group, they are the most accepting of LGBT, okay, of any other generation, and at the same time, the most religious. Is never, I mean, more so than any other generation before them. At their age, they're the most accepting of LGBT, that's true. But they're also more religious than the boomers, the Xers, the millennials. It's crazy. Because they're interested in spiritual things. And so that should excite us. Because there's a field waiting to be harvested.
Just like pre-Christian, they were interested in spiritual things
Right.
then too.
Yep. So it's actually, should excite the church and not give them the willies. How can the Christian reach out to the postmodern? All right. We must help the postmodern see that if there are no absolutes, then the statement that there are no absolutes is flawed. Right? Because just that statement, there are no absolutes, is an absolute statement.
Yeah.
So just the mentality before that, just something as simple as that of realizing, oh wow, is a questioning thing. Like, we should be like, hey, I agree. You should be questioning. You should question that statement because it doesn't make sense. And that's one of those things that I can't tell you how many times I've talked to someone and just pointed this out and they go, oh, you're right. So there has to be absolutes. Exactly. Like just a simple thing like that. Because most people that hold to that, they heard it as a slogan and they just believe it. You know, that's why in the fall last year, I did that TikTok theology series. Because most people learn through that 30-second, a minute or less, videos about theology. And if we can go, okay, this is what they're believing, I'm going to take the time and work with them through those ideas. That's what is needed. It's time, it's effort, and it's authentic lives. It's not, I'm here just to evangelize you, and once you're evangelized, then I'll move on with my life. You're very important to me. And so it's huge. Words are not enough, right? Like they're saying I can create it with my world. Well, what they want is someone that is authentic, that actually shows actions and truthfulness with life. Because think about this. If you are the one who creates truth, and are you going to live up to that truth all the time? No, it's going to be constantly in flux, right? But if you're a believer and you say, no, this is truth and I'm going to live by that truth, that's an anchor point. And in a world that is constantly shifting, it's a point of this person's solid. Why? Why can they love the way they do, and they speak the way they do, and nothing affects them? Why? Because Jesus is an anchor. Everything around us is sinking sand. Like that is a good little song. You know? Because that's the world we live in. And for the heart that was created by God, it desires to be stable. You know? So, all right. I know this is going over longer than I wanted. So if anyone wants to, if anyone wants to leave, you can. I won't say anything while you're
Are you
here.
going to work? Okay, I gotta go.
We're finishing this. Like I gotta get this done this week.
Is this gonna be on video, on
Yes.
YouTube or anything?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll put this up on YouTube. It goes
I'm
up
staying,
tomorrow.
but I just might wanna.
Yeah, the whole
Okay.
series is on YouTube.
It is, okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
All right, hurry up, get out of here. Okay, we can't talk about Candace until she leaves.
Trying to hurry.
All right. So nihilism. Now that was just the overview of the whole system. Okay. So these are going to go a little bit faster because you already have the basics, right? But you need to know these two worldviews because these are the heartbreak stuff. Like nihilism is the heartbreak worldview. All right. So in No Country for Old Men, I don't know if you've seen that, but Cormac McCarthy says the point is there ain't no point. Like that's nihilism in the summary. All right. So let's define. Whoops. Ooh, okay. Come on. All right. So let's define the word Word first used in the early 1800s. Nihil is just means nothing. Okay, just means nothing.
Annihilation.
Annihilation. Yep, just means gone, zero, nothing. All right. So when we talk about nihilism, we're talking about a philosophical worldview. All right, that stems, and we see this with Nietzsche, we see this with other philosophers of the late 1800s. But this is where it's going to grow from. The definition, the dictionary definition, is a total rejection of established laws and institutions. What's that sound like? Postmodernism, right? That's what postmodernism is. That's why we say it falls under here. It falls under our postmodern thing. So now we're here, and our first one is nihilism. Okay? And that's just a rejection of all things. Oh, whoops. So what I say is it's a non-philosophy philosophy. This is a philosophy that rejects all philosophy. Like that's it. So it's a non-philosophy philosophy. Right? The history of nihilism. So, okay. As atheism started taking root, right? That became the big thing in the late 1800s. Big thing, atheism, right? Completely rejecting God. Darwinism found a way to get around this whole creation issue, right? So the sciences, we started doing a lot. Archaeology starts booming. Medical practice starts booming. All these different things, biology, physics, all these things boom in atheism, right? It's all about the natural world. And so atheism takes root. The question that is brought with it, was, if there is no God, then what is the purpose of life? And that becomes the issue. Without God, this is Nietzsche. God is dead and we have killed him. How do we live? Where does purpose come from? This is actually what Nietzsche is trying to get at. And so, there you go. There he is, Friedrich Nietzsche. Answer this question with his famous quote, God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. So where does purpose come from? This becomes the issue. Now we have to go, okay, atheism killed God. How can society, how can humans live without the purpose of God? And so we just jump into this because you'll see in nihilism how they answer all this. Okay? So what is prime reality? The really real? Matter exists eternally and is all there is. God does not exist. So there's no hope now. In atheism, you might even have a little hope that maybe science can find God. Nihilism says no. God is dead and we have killed him.
Well, how do they answer the question of the second law of thermodynamics?
It doesn't mean.
Right, son?
Remember, postmodern, those types of absolutes don't matter.
They don't just say the second law doesn't exist.
Well, not so much that, it's, you're going to see where nihilism goes. Okay? Nihilism is going somewhere because purpose has lost. Okay? Just think where that's going to go. Okay? We'll get there. Why those things don't matter to the nihilists. Okay? What is the nature of external reality of the world around us? The cosmos exists as a uniformity of cause and effect in a closed system, with chance and randomness as guides. Notice the difference if you look back at your atheism. It's just cause and effect, right? That's the world around us. Now throw in the idea of chance and randomness. Think about that.
So it's not cause and effect.
It's cause and effect, but it's random. The emphasis on the random, I mean, think about this. Have you ever heard or experienced a child getting cancer? And then the natural question is why?
Mm-hmm.
Why someone that young would experience something like this? Or any number of like really hurtful things, child is abused, Why the tsunami that kills 200,000 people, that stuff. Now think about from a Christian point of view. God is sovereign, right? There is purpose behind this, though we might not see it. Job's story, right? There's purpose. We might not understand it, but there is something here. God is good, and He will, in time, will work all things out. Take God out of that equation. There is no God. God is dead, we have killed Him. Now ask that question again. In that state of mind, where would your mind go? Right? It's random, it doesn't have purpose, it's meaningless. This is where nihilism walks. It says, okay, atheist, there's no God. So that means everything's random, everything's by chance, there's no purpose to anything. The good guy wins, the bad guy wins, it doesn't matter either way. Because it's all meaningless. Does that make sense? Do you see where nihilism's going? Okay. John got the right idea. So what is a human? Human beings are conscious machines without the ability to affect their own destiny or do anything significant. Therefore, human beings, as valuable beings, are dead. So now, if a kid comes to this conclusion, and he views everyone around him as non-valuable, what does he do? Goes and shoots up the school. The Columbine kids, they were nihilists. Hardcore. Like if you read some of their stuff, hardcore nihilists. Because there is no value in humans. We've moved way beyond that. You can't even create, at this point, within the postmodern mind, you can't even create value. We're so far beyond it. And this is, to me, what should break our hearts as Christians. Like, we value people. Like, they are made in the image of God. For God so loved the world. And pastors will do the preaching point. Put your name in the place of world. Because God loved you to die on the cross. Like, that's the emphasis of Christianity. But we're beyond that. God is dead, we have killed him. What's left? Like, that's the idea here. What happens to a person after death? Death is extinction. That's what the atheists have told us. Right? There is no purpose. There is no reason. Death is extinction of personality and individuality, which means we have no purpose and all is meaningless. Right? Because I'm born, I live my 70 to 80 years, and I die. What have I done in the world? Even people that were rich and powerful, how many of us can remember rich and powerful people throughout history? You might go, well,
One, two.
yeah, Alexander the Great. How about his dad? Anyone remember Alexander the Great's dad? No. He brought together all of Macedonia into a combined Greek world. And no one remembers him because of Alexander. Can you believe that?
So I'm going to ask a silly question. So this state, obviously, there's a cause why this is happening.
Mm-hmm.
But how did that happen when we have Romans, where it talks about that all humans have a knowledge or that God or something exists?
Right.
So how did that process happen with that particular thing in effect?
Right. I would describe it like a dog. Like if you take a dog, almost every single dog that you'll ever encounter is going to be a loving dog. Like they just love to please humans, right? What do you have to do to make it a mean dog? Just beat it down, right? Like, you take a sweet dog and you just beat that dog. Just beat it and beat it and beat it. It becomes ferocious and it will even bite its own master. And so I would describe it like that. We have beaten down society to the point where you
So
can't.
who are you referring to?
Who beat it?
Yeah.
The God of this world. So as a believer, he beat Satan.
Okay.
Yeah. Because what is Satan's job is to lie, right? Like that's all he wants to do. He wants to lie, he wants to pervert. This is what he does in the garden. And so what does he do? He says, hey, deist, God's not around. Right? You don't see him right now. He's not physical. You can't see him. And Jesus goes, yeah, that's right. And then he goes to the agnostic and goes, remember what the deist said? God's not around. So is he really there? And when you're told this again and again, right, it's the beating it down. And even up to, like even right now, like you can take a poll of Western world, and most people will say, I do believe that there is a God. Even with all the beating down in our society over the last 2 centuries of there is no God, there is no God, people still say, yeah, I believe there's a God. Like most people in the United States are not atheists. In fact, worldwide, I think atheism is only like 2% of the world. But the ramifications of it are spread throughout all of society, at least all of Western society. This isn't so much in the other world, where people still are in this zone. And so this is why you can hear stories of, there's a Pentecost every single day. 3,000 people are coming to Christ every single day in places other than the Western world. Because in the Western world, we've been beaten down.
So you can see Satan behind this, because what his goal is to ultimately attack the ultimate absolute,
Right.
which is God himself.
All right.
So you start by attacking every absolute. And then the ultimate.
And what, if you look at our history, right, the Western world is really the world that took, and I'm not saying that the Eastern world didn't evangelize and things like that, but the Western world took very seriously Jesus' call to share the gospel to all nations. In the late 1800s, you have the missionary boards that just started sending out people and saying, so where is the biggest threat to Satan's kingdom?
The sender.
It's the sender. It's the ones that are on fire to send out missionaries. So what does he do? Beat it down, beat it down, beat it. So now we are dealing with an epidemic of the unchurched in our society. Part of that's our fault.
So
we went
when you go
much.
witness to somebody now, in our culture here, and you tell them about Jesus, the blood of Christ, you know, and the resurrection,
Right.
are we, in your view, are we being worthless or useless?
No. But we just have to be better at it. So it's taking the approach of Paul in Acts 17. So in Acts 17, he's dealing with a completely unchristianized world, right? It's the philosophers on Mount Mars. So what he does is he goes to them and he just surveys until he has the opportunity, just surveys Athens. And he looks at all the different, what are they called? All the different gods. And then he comes to them and he says, you know, I see that you guys are very religious. And I saw this statue of this unknown God. Let me tell you about it. And he starts with everything that they all agree on, which is creation. And so, when we present the gospel to teenagers,
She's cold.
oh, I understand that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. It was so hot.
That's okay.
So when we present the gospel to teenagers, we use that acronym right there, so on the wall. So it's GOSPEL, and you'll actually hear me say this from the pulpit sometimes. So when we share the gospel, this is how we do it. We go, God created us to be with Him. First thing, you are worth something. God created you. You have worth. You are not a machine that has no purpose. God created you. And the purpose of that is to be with Him. Because Paul states, I think it's in Philippians, where he states, all things were created for Him, or by Him, and for Him. So God created you to be with Him. So that goes after that image problem, right? So this is, so talking to a postmodern. But our sin separates us from God. So we say, you know and I know that this world's messed up, right? Like, we have meta-narratives that cause oppression. You know why that is? It's because of sin. And this is why when people ask me, why does God allow sin? I always ask the question in response, why do you allow sin? Right? Every time that you do something, or why does God allow evil? Why do you allow evil? Every time you do something that harms someone, you are adding to the evil in the world. Just like when I do it. I add to the evil. When I do something, when I hurt someone, when I lie, when I cheat, when I steal, I add to it. So my sin is what causes that relationship to break. It's not anything that God did, it's what I did. It's what you do. You know, that's why, if I'm having a conversation, we're talking to Fred. Like, Fred, you're in the same boat as me. God loves us. He created us to be with Him, but we cause the problem. And this all takes time, right, to work through this. So God created us to be with Him. Our sin separated from us from God, but sin, we can't fix that. That's not an issue we can fix because it's greater than us. I can cause it, but I can't fix it. You know, and you talk about example. Well, we have to, when talking to a postmodernist, we have to be able to integrate Scripture without pointing to something that's absolute. Does that make sense? Because they will reject that. So it's so our sin separates us from God. We base it off of Scripture, right? So our sin separates us from God. Sins cannot be removed by good deeds. So it's like, have you ever opened a toothpaste? This is where narrative stories comes in. Ever open up a toothpaste, right? You ever squeeze it all out? I'll actually, yeah. So, see, you guys have all the stories. Like, this is why I say grandparents are so important for the younger generation, because you guys have all this wisdom and all this knowledge. You get this stuff, and it's what they need, what they crave. But
can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
I'll be quiet. So you have, you know, you're saying that to do this, but the ultimate, I guess, knowledge, are we to rely on our churches to help us transfer into this, so we have the knowledge of how to witness to this postmodern? Because obviously, I don't know about you guys, but this is all new to me. It's like postmodern. Like,
right.
hey, I mean, that's why my kids are weird. But yeah.
Yeah. No.
So
I'm right there.
So what is the best way to get this knowledge for us to be effective?
So that's one of the reasons why we do this. But also,
this is here, but I mean,
right,
we're all going to go
home.
back to different churches and stuff.
So this is why YouTube is so great as a resource, because there's so much from apologetics out there that deal with this stuff. So if you wanted to deal something with this type of stuff, what do you mean? It's literally this guy, and his channel is called "What Do You Meme?" A meme is a
M-E-M-E.
yeah, but he deals with this kind of, I say modern, contemporary, how to share the gospel and things like that. And you can find a lot of people that do this. So the problem with us as churches is, one, I've had a lot of conversations with pastors that don't know. How do I do this? I don't know, right? Pastors are not equipped to do this stuff from school. They're equipped to read the Bible, to exegete the Bible. Most schools don't even teach them how to preach. Like, that's not even on their curriculum. Here's history, here's all these things. They don't tell them how to counsel, how to deal with issues in the church. They don't teach them anything. So when a pastor goes out to a church for the first time, they are floundering. Like, young pastors are floundering in all this. The only reason I do this is because this is how I got into Jesus. Like, I studied religions and things like that, and that brought me to Christ. So it's a passion of mine. So that's an issue. And this is why, like, especially churches that seem to be like falling apart, or they're not reaching the young people, it's because they're faced with a giant monster. You know, it's like that old saying, how do you eat an elephant? Right? Most people look at the elephant and go, I can't eat that.
One piece at a time.
Yeah, and that's what you have to do, is one piece at a time, meaning that I have to learn about each of these things, right? I got to learn the macro view of this, which is the big overall, how do we get from theism to postmodernism? So me as a pastor, I have to learn all this. And then I have to go, okay, how can I teach this? You know? And if I don't see, like, I run into pastors who are like, oh, no, you just preach the gospel. Okay. How do I do that? That becomes the issue. How do I do that? Right? And so one of the reasons why we started this for the adults is to give you guys a better understanding of what's out there. At least an overview of it, right? But there are good, some good books that are out there. Frank Turk, a lot of things by him. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, because Frank Turk is a guy that goes to, T-U-R-U-K, or something like that. Frank Turk, I don't know. I'm probably not even saying it right, because I always add like little things onto my speech. But he goes to college campuses and he deals with these things. He deals it on an academic level, like debating atheists, and he does it on a college level, which is dealing with postmodernists. And so he's a good resource. But that's really how to start eating one part of the elephant at a time. And I would, if you have your pastor's ear, to have an apologetics seminar.
Yeah.
You know, invite, if you guys can, get together with, if you're a small church, but there's other small churches, get together with other small churches, bring in an apologist to actually speak on this, on these issues. Or have it to where, I mean, what is it? There are groups out there, I'm trying to think of groups, that this is what they do. There's always apologetics conferences going on all over the place. One's coming up in Southern California. So you could like stream those things. Like find an apologetics conference and just stream it. And those give you a whole different, like a lot of different people. Someone like Vodi Bachman is a great resource. He is a great preacher and he deals with a lot. Vodi, V-O-D-D-I-E, Bachman. He deals with, like, he goes in depth with some of this stuff, like where it comes from, super deep history on some of this stuff, modern stuff that we're dealing with in our society. Vodi Bachman is a great resource. Keep saying, in my mind keeps CERN International, but that's a Muslim apologist. But like Bible Answer Man, Hank Hanegraaff, like he's a good resource. I don't agree with everything he does, but Reasons to Believe, I think, is another group. William Lane Craig is good at this. He's more of a modern approach, but he deals with some of these other issues, so he's a good resource. That's William Lane Craig. But that's how I would approach it. If I was a parishioner and I had the ear of my pastor be like, hey, this crazy guy down Quartzsite encouraged us to have an apologetics night. Could we do something like that? Because we want to reach our community and, you know, maybe get together with, like I said, several other smaller churches and have it at a gymnasium. And just have it, you know, get a computer and hook it up to an HDMI screen and you can stream it that way.
I was going to call you now to figure that out.
Oh, it's super simple. Look at this.
I know.
Like, that's it. But
I
yeah.
remember Cindy had to call you.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's how I would approach it. Because again, pastors are not trained in this. They're not, because that's not what, like an MDiv, Masters of Divinity is what most pastors get. And it does not prepare you for stuff like this. Yeah.
I found International Society of Christian Apologetics in Southern California. Is that the
Yep.
one you were referring to?
Yeah, that's coming up, isn't it?
Yeah, April 5th and 6th.
Yeah. I mean, some of those guys are really good. I think Clay Jones is in that. Clay Jones, he's been here.
Thefieldschurch.org.
Oh, I don't know.
International, what was it? International?
Society of Apologists.
Yeah, it's International Society of Christian Apologetics.
But Clay Jones has come over. One of the best books to read on the problem of evil is his book, Clay Jones. And it's called Why Does God Allow Evil, or The Problem of Evil, or something like that. It's a fantastic book. And it deals with like just that issue, but it is one of the best books on that subject I've ever read.
Anyway, just gonna say the whole point in this class is we have founded in Canada,
Yeah.
and we came to this church and saw there was this class going on. So it's really valuable because it expands our grasp of a lot of things, and you know, Christian related.
Right. Well, that's why we do it.
Yeah.
It's because it's a need.
This blew my mind.
I wish I was here for the whole thing. I'm going to be going to YouTube, so yeah. But I am going to call it a night. Thank you so much.
Okay, yeah, no problem. And anyone else, if you want to jump ship, now's the time.
No, hurry it along, we'll
Okay.
figure out.
All right. We only got one more after this, and it's actually another word short. Okay. Yeah. If people would stop interrupting.
See what
That's what we do best.
All right. So I don't even know where we are. Are we on 4?
5.
5.
Go to 5.
Oh yeah. Okay. Why is it possible to know anything at all? The study of the world around us, which leads us to the belief that humans are in a box and are unable to realize it because we cannot see ourselves out of the box. And so this is a huge thing. So if you're here, right, you don't know you're here. That's the idea. Because if you're in the closed system, how do you know that you're in the closed system? Like, how can you fully know that? If our universe is, as they say, expanding at an exponential rate, how can we know that that's true? Like, I mean, just take it on this small level.
So
How many of you have been to the pyramids at Giza?
Pyramids where?
The pyramids at Giza in Egypt.
Not us.
Yeah. How do you know they're real?
Testimonies of others.
Testimonies of others?
Photos.
How can you trust it?
History?
History? How can you trust it? In fact, this goes to the point where some people put forth this idea. Everything before us is actually false, and all we have is right now in the moment. Like, this is a true philosophical idea.
Wow.
That you can't even trust your memory, because what if we are in a matrix and everything is created for you in this moment? How do you even know that the person next to you is actually real?
That's an age-old question that goes back to ancient philosophers.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's weird.
I think, therefore I am. That goes out the window. Because how can I know anything at all? If I'm just a machine, if I'm just a random neurons firing, how do I know that those aren't being manipulated outside of myself? How do I know I'm not just a brain in a vat? This is actually, if you've ever watched the movie The Matrix, this is it.
Mhm.
Like that idea, it's a nihilistic idea, that's it. Right? So, this is a huge thing. So you can't know. Can't know anything. That's in the nihilistic idea. So how do you know what is right and wrong? Moral values are relative to one's culture. What the tribe nation social unit says is valuable. There is never an absolute standing. I'm just going to check to make sure that the recording's still going. Okay, yeah.
Oh,
That would be horrible.
I do have to go.
Oh my goodness. I actually have to do that for a section in another series. Anyways, but there's no absolute standard. There's no right and wrong. It's all gone. We just make up what we want. Like it's gone. So if I kill someone, there is no moral standard. That action is just as right as if I let them live. Does that make sense? Like, because morality means nothing. It's all construct. It's all what you have decided. And so there's never a right or wrong. I could kill you in this moment, or I could not. In the next moment, I could kill you, or I could not. And they are both right. So, what is the meaning of human history? One past affects the future. We have no power in the present because of our past. This present will affect the next future, and so on and so on. Think about that. Think about the ramifications of that. Anything I do means nothing. Why? Because, remember, we had this idea earlier, right? I'm here, all of this has already affected me, and there's nothing I can do to get away from it. Therefore, I have no power. That's why everything's meaningless. That's why if I shoot that person, it's meaningless. Because I don't have anything that controls me. And yet, everything I do is going to control someone else. So it all goes back to that first cause. That's the only thing that meant anything. And so this is like, if you're feeling at any point that, man, this is really depressing, and it is.
Make sure you're grounded.
Yeah, because think about this. If you don't have Jesus, the anchor, Scripture says Jesus is an anchor in storms. What happens to a ship without an anchor? It runs into a bridge. Right? Like,
It just happened.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. But yeah, so a ship without an anchor just has no direction. It has no purpose. When it's caught in a storm, it's just going wherever the storm wants it to go. Because no one's at the helm. So Garth Brooks has a song, The River, and a dreamer is like a vessel, just following where it goes. Like that is the postmodern idea. You're just going. You can't control it. But the one thing that in that song is, the Lord is my captain. That's a huge thing. Is if the Lord's your captain, then He directs where the ship goes. He knows the storms, but for someone that has no captain, ship just hits the shore and doesn't mean anything. It has no purpose behind it. It has no destination. And so all of that. So I want to give you the 3 problems I see with nihilism. This is the only one I do this with because it's such an issue. First, if everything is meaningless and we are nothing but a product of our past, our nature, and our nurture, then all actions and decisions humans make are meaningless, and therefore any action is as valid as the next. So this is a problem, because it gives you license to do whatever you want, to whomever you want, whenever you want. And so shooting up a school is just as valid as helping a lady across the street. Can you live in a world like that?
I don't want to.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to live, right? In a world like that. Neither does the nihilist. That's the thing. Nihilism, and this is where I'm going to show my hand, nihilism is suicide. True nihilism. If you lived in a nihilistic world, nihilistic mindset, there is no purpose, which is the antithesis to humanity. We are given purpose. Scripture says that that God puts eternity into the hearts of men. So if that's in my heart, right? I know I have purpose. I know that there's something more, and yet I've been beaten down this whole time to say there is no purpose. There is no purpose. How do I bring the two together? One has to win. Either yes, there is purpose, or no, there isn't. If there's purpose, I have a reason to go on. If there's not, what do I do? Die. Suicide. I try to go out doing the best thing I can, or the funnest thing I can. It's a heartbreaking moment when you realize without purpose there is nothing. All right. Number 2, nihilists try to think about the universe, but at their core they cannot, because they can know nothing, because they cannot trust their own thoughts, for they have been bred and molded into them. They have no original thoughts. Just think about that. Like, if you're sitting there, I don't know if you've ever seen things like this. You ever known someone that they were told they were useless and worthless and they wouldn't amount to anything? What happened to someone like that?
They start believing it.
Yeah, they believe it.
They do, and they act out.
Yeah. And so if a girl is told by their mom or their dad, you're just a little whore, there's nothing worth of you, what does she do?
Becomes what she's told.
It's what they call a self-fulfilling prophecy. Right? She doesn't see her worth. And so when you get to this point where you don't see worth, how hard it is to come out of that. I mean, most of us have baggage, and it's like, like growing up, I joke with my kids, they're like, man, Nan is so mean, like my mom. Nan is so mean. I'm like, you know nothing about Nana being mean. Like, she would throw me across the room. She's like that big. She'd just grab me and just throw me across the room. And I'm like, you guys just get told you can't have seconds. Like, you don't get ice cream. Like, that's nothing. I wish I had that, Nana. Like, I bring my baggage to my kids and be like, my life was so much worse than you, right? We all have baggage, but when you have such baggage that you are just nothing, even when someone comes in and says you're worth something, all you hear is that's a lie. And so, think about this. I love the story of the woman caught in adultery. Love it. I think it's one of the greatest things, because in that moment, that woman heard that she had love for the first time. Like, Jesus says, I do not condemn you. How, from the cries of stoner and all this, and in that moment, she was told, you're worth something. That completely changes, right? So the story is, that's Mary Magdalene. And who is the one that the risen Lord says, go and tell my disciples? It's Mary. It's Mary Magdalene, same girl. Because it was that moment of breakthrough for her. But just think how hard that breakthrough must have been. But it was there. So, sorry, now I'm getting preachy. I just love that stuff. Last one. One can only practice nihilism for a short time if a person stays true to the core belief that there is no meaning or absolute sin, and they must accept that their life has no value. They must continue down that path which leads to their own realization of meaningless, or this is really important, or abandon the view. There is no in between. You can't live a nihilistic life. Like if you watch, go to these philosophers that are like nihilistic, they all killed themselves. Or they changed their mind. Like they had to change their view. And that's actually what the next view is. Now, I want you guys, I like this. I think this is so fun. You might not care for it. I don't even know if it's going to work, because I forgot about it. But I just realized it when I looked over there. And it probably won't work. If it doesn't, I'm going to be upset. Okay, I have a video for you guys. It's only a little bit, it's a song. You have to really listen to it. So hopefully it works. It'll work. Just listen to it. You have to really listen.
We've got to be young while we live and live while we are young.
Can you hear it?
We've got to live for tonight, cause tomorrow won't come. Tonight is all we have. Let's be fancy and heartless. Time flies, never to return. At the end there's only darkness. The state of nature is war, so let's tear up this joint. Why are we even existing? Can we just find the point? Peace is a social contract. It is only a social contract. We'll never see the sun again. This is our last night on earth. We'll be dancing for the rest of our lives. So objectively, where is the work? But we own the night. Yes, we own the night. Where there is no property, there is no injustice. So how can we own the night without violating nature itself? Morals are a product of reason. Is that what defines a nation? Let's light the sky on fire to confirm that it's not consensual hallucination. We have to party like we'll never see tomorrow, thereby destroying the intrinsic value of this moment and ourselves. The certainty of death invalidates our actions tonight.
That one didn't even rhyme.
We're thrown into this universe with no purpose, compelled to fabricate meaning. There is no good, there is no right, and our morals are crafted out of reason. We are a bundle of features when taken away, leave nothing to describe. Imagine something you can't describe, it doesn't exist. Therefore, neither do you. And God is dead and we have killed him. God is dead and we have killed him. Hope is the worst of all evils because it prolongs the torments of man. For his pity of man, God hath died.
You guys are dancing the truth. Oh, dancing the truth feels good. Can I buy you a drink?
Anyways, so you might not have got all that.
That's frenzy.
Yeah. So yeah.
Can I say what I saw?
Yeah.
So they're like starting off like, yeah, this is a great thing, and then like her words start hitting them.
Yep.
Like, oh my goodness, this is awful. But it's starting off going, what kind of words is this? This is crap. And then he starts going, wait, maybe this is good. And so like he's a new one coming into the thought,
Yeah.
is what I saw.
Convert.
Where the others have been in it a while and they're just, it's leading them to depression.
Well, any other thoughts on that? I just really think it's fun. So the idea here, the guy's supposed to be a philosopher.
Okay.
So he's reading a philosophy book, and as the girl's singing, and you're right, everyone else it's all about the music, right? And they're just living their lives, and when the words start hitting, there's meaningless, it's nothing, right? They have what's called an existential crisis, where it's like, there's no meaning. Like, and it doesn't matter how good the beats are. This is reality. Where the philosopher is like, yeah, it's all meaningless. And here's the philosopher, it's all meaning. This is actually what happens in schools. The philosopher, though they themselves will hold on to these views, they'll become existentialists. They're pushing these nihilistic views onto these teenagers, these children, right? Because they're not prepared for this stuff. And now, where do they go? They go off the rails. You know? And so, I think it's really funny. Not that, but this thing, because it brings about this idea of this is actually what's happening in our with our kids.
Yeah.
She actually told the truth about the outcome of that philosophy.
Right.
In that song.
Yep. And so, yeah, it's just one of those things. I found that a long time ago, and I thought, this is so right. You know? And so, okay, so what can a Christian take away from the nihilist? In our escape from God, we find that there is truly nothing for us. The Christian can actually agree with this. Like, if you walk away from God, what's left? Eternal death. Right? Like, it is. If God is joy and peace, no tear for the eye, right? Pure, like, love. Away from God is
Meaningless.
Isn't this the story, like Ecclesiastes?
Yeah.
Basically.
everything is meaningless.
Yeah.
Yep. It is. This is why Solomon was so right when he said, "There is nothing new under the sun." The Bible deals with all these issues, and so it should point us to how we can deal with them. Like, if we get someone that's like, "Yeah, everything's meaningless," let me introduce you to a guy who did that, who sought after all the things and found out everything's meaningless without God. And so, and this is why I always tell people when they're like, "Oh, you know, this world's all messed up and everything," I said, just take a moment and think about this. If God is true, and right now we're in a marred world, right? Meaning sin has marred us to the point where everyone has fallen short of the glory of God, but God's still active, and He is still working things. He's working out good for those who love Him. We have this thing called common grace in theology, where everyone in the whole world has a common grace upon their lives. And then there's salvific grace, which is what you need to get to salvation. But everyone has a general grace upon their lives, meaning you can still experience love. You can still experience joy. You can still experience beauty. At the judgment seat of Christ, we're going to be separated. Those who go on to eternal life and those who go on to eternal death. Eternal death, a part of that is there is no love. There is no any of that common grace. So it is, you think this is bad. Eternal life, eternal death is worse. That's why eternal life is great. And we can't even contemplate that. The closest you could ever get to really contemplating that is in war. Right? So I've never been to war. I've just had a lot of conversations with those that have been. And there is nothing. Like, there's the fog of war, right? There's death, there's mutilation. I would say that's probably the closest you could get to a world without God. And so it is. So we can agree with them. So without God, existence is meaningless. Therefore, God must exist. Like, think about that. I know there's meaning. Like, personally, like, I know there's meaning because I seek after it. Why do people get jobs and they go, you know what, this isn't fulfilling? Because you're searching for meaning. Why do we have kids? Meaning. Why do we want that best car? We want meaning. But why does that car not fulfill us? Because it's not what we were designed for. So we know we desire meaning. Even when we're contemplating these things, we're all talking about meaning, purpose. So we all know it. And without God, there's no meaning, there's no purpose. So therefore, we have this innate sense of meaning, therefore there is God. Like, that's a small apologetic. So, and you talk about how can we reach people like this, that's one way. It's just pointing out, you know there's meaning, yet you say there's not. How can you deal with both? It's because God does exist. How can the Christian reach out to the nihilist? This is youth ministry, by the way. Like, dealing with nihilistic ideas all the time is youth ministry. And so, and the more I deal with youth, the more I realize that they are being beaten down to this point. And they're doing, and it's happening more and more with social media. That's why I always tell people, parents, get rid of the social media for your kids. It's not good for them. But how do we help them? Through love and helping them see that God created them with purpose and in God's image. We have to love exponentially upon those that are in the nihilistic worldview. Like, if you have someone in your life and you can see, like, especially a younger person, grandkids, even kids, right? Because I'm about your guys' kids' age, right? In the 40s. Okay, they're millennials. But anyone younger than me, they're gonna have a tendency into this direction. Depression is up, suicides are up. There's a reason. It's because of this stuff. So just reaching out to them and saying, hey, just want you to know I love you. I think God has great purposes for you. And I just want you to know that mom, grandma, grandpa, we love you. Like, just something like that. You know, your friend, hey, I just want you to know we love you. Even going down and just being at, like, Dollar General or something, and a young person's helping you out, and they look down, distressed, be like, hey, you know what? I know life's hard, but I want you to know that you're loved, that there's a God who loves you. Just stuff like that, being told, because remember, words do have power, and we have the opportunity to share God's love. We need to be loving exponentially upon people, and letting them know that there is a God who cares. So that's a huge thing. Like, I would say that is more important than any apologetic you could do. Because if, what does Jesus say? Or not Jesus, was it John? What is it? If we do not love, it's Paul, 1 Corinthians 13. You know, if I do not love, I'm just a clanging symbol, right? Yeah, like, that's it. So love is the most important thing. All right, this is the last of it. The last worldview, I swear, we'll be done. Okay. Yeah. So Anton Chekhov, he said, the world is, of course, nothing but our conception of it. Do you see the nihilism there? And then do you see the change? Except our conception of it. So when we talked about postmodernism, we go from the one extreme to the other. From nihilism, there's no meaning, to we can create meaning. In our overview, that's what we talked about, how that's what postmodernism is. Okay? So let's define it. First used between 1940 and 1945. What was going on? There was a little war going on, right? We as a world were having an existential crisis. So why was the Great War called the Great War to end all wars? You because no one thought that we could ever have a war greater, more deadly, or anything, right? So when we did have it, that was an existential crisis. How is this possible? And so it comes from the Latin existentialis, which just means to relate to existing. So it's just, how do I relate to existing? That's all it means. And that's the, what it is. I dropped it in the comment. Most of you didn't see that one. It was cool. Yes. The dictionary, a modern philosophical movement stressing the importance of personal experience. You postmodernists, right? Personal experience. And responsibility, though. This is the big thing. This is the responsibility part. And the demands that they make on the individual who is seen as a free agent in a deterministic and seemingly meaningless universe. So what the existentialists will say is like, yes, it is meaningless. That's what it all appears to be. Everything we do is meaningless. Yes, that's what it appears to be. But, there's a but. We can make purpose. This is the idea. That's why it's an existential crisis. Because now you're in a nihilistic worldview and nothing is meaningful. Everything is just as meaningful as the next thing. And I have a crisis. Do I follow this all the way through and kill myself? Or do I make purpose out of nothing? And so who becomes God?
You.
Me. Because we have moved so, we are literally the furthest we can get to theism in nihilism. And that existential step is you can be like God. So I am. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
You've seen those YouTube videos, the ads where they say, something about you. There's nothing more powerful than you.
Yeah.
That's a similar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we're living in an existential age. We'll be here for a while. I say it's like this: the world may seem meaningless, but we can create meaning for it. So that's how I would describe existentialists. The world is meaningless. It's seemingly meaningless. But what can you do? I can create it. And this is, this is idolatry.
Yeah.
Idolatry of self. So, all right. So the history, so the philosophical path leads from theism, right? God is here. That's the personalness of God. To deism, God left. To agnosticism, do we need God? To atheism, there is no God. To nihilism, without God, there is no meaning. This is the philosophical, this is the step-by-step from theism to nihilism. This is how we got here to existentialism. It's just, God was here, but then he left. Do we need God? Because he doesn't seem to be around. There is no God to, well, there's no meaning without God. Like that is how we get to this point where we have the existential crisis. Okay. So philosophers could not live in a world where there is no meaning because everything within humanity cries out for purpose. So if I have purpose, and I know I have purpose, yet I believe that there is no purpose, you can't reconcile those two realities, right? I can't reconcile, I know I have purpose, but there is no purpose. One has to give way in some way. Okay? So existentialism falls back to say that there must be meaning because we automatically know there is. So what they do is they go, there is no meaning, into nihilism, and they go, whoa, I don't like this. Have you ever been on like an edge of something and you're like just looking straight down?
Yes.
And you're like, just get kind of vertigo and you're just like, oh no, I don't like that. That's existential crisis. And so what they have to do is they have to back up into something. Okay, what is that something? That's what we're talking about. So there's two forms of existentialism. The first form is atheistic. it's going from nihilism right back into atheism. So it's taking one direct step back. So there's no God, right? That's what atheism believes. But we can make meaning in spite of it. So they're saying, you know what? I don't like nihilism because I'll kill myself. So I step back into what I do like, which is the philosophy where, okay, I can be an atheist, but I can create this meaning. I can give myself more power, in a sense, than what I could do in nihilism. And so meaning becomes a construct of our perceived understanding of worth. What does postmodernists do? They create worth, they create meaning, they create identity by their words. And so I can't deal with actual meaningless, so I just make it up. That's all it is. It's just making it up. It's make-believe. This is why I always laugh when an atheist goes, you can't believe in that. It's like, you guys are make-believing all the time that there's meaning in this world. Like if I followed that, you know, I could believe in Candyland. It's the same thing. And so that's what it is without true meaning, something that anchor you down as Jesus is, you have to make believe that there is meaning. And what's funny is people go, well, that's just what the Christian says. No. This is what the philosophers, the atheistic philosophers believe, that they have to create this meaning. The other form is theistic. So you can fall back into atheism, or the belief in God gives us meaning even though He's not real. So again, it's make-believe. Well, there's not really a God, but I guess I could live as if there was a God. That's make-believe, right? So either way, you're still just making it up. And when we talk about progressive Christianity, this is where we're at. It's a make-believe God. It's taking things of Christianity and denying Orthodox Christianity, true theistic Christianity, and just playing house, playing church, playing Christian, because they don't actually believe what they say. That's progressive Christianity.
They don't believe what they say, but they'll profess it?
Yeah, they'll profess that, yes, we believe in Jesus. Okay, so Jesus said, do not sin. Oh, well, we don't believe that.
So they'll pick and choose.
Yeah. Because they have to make it up. They're existentialists they're theistic existentialists is what they are. That's all progressive Christianity is. Or New Age Christianity, or however you want to say it, that's what it is. It's just existentialism wrapped up in the Christian terminology. And so they just make up whatever they want. And a belief creates our worth. So it's just whatever I think. That's the idea. All right. So how does the atheist? Now there are two ways to do this. Okay. So the atheist existentialist and then the theistic. So we're going to answer both. Okay. So the atheist would answer it this way: the cosmos is composed solely of matter, but to human beings, reality appears in two forms: subjective and objective. Okay. So the way you perceive things and the things that really are. That's how it appears.
I'm noticing perception,
Right.
appearance is a big word.
Right, because that's not necessarily how it actually is. Because again, you're still confined to, I don't really know. Right? Because you're still dealing with the nihilistic stuff, so you really don't know. What is the nature of external reality? For human beings alone, only humans, now this all depends on the existentialists, but mostly it's only the humans. Existence precedes essence. People make themselves who they are. So why, now we're talking trans community, why can the trans community be, I'm a woman, I'm a girl, I'm a dog, I'm a unicorn. Literally that's going on. So why can't I be those things? Well, because my existence is here and I choose who I am. I make my own essence.
And yet, when these people take their own lives, jumping off a cliff, the law of gravity is an absolute that they're using to take their life.
As far as we can perceive it. Because remember, it might be the only meaningful thing you can do is to take your life. Because that's really the only thing you can control. Right?
Control.
What is a human being? Each person is totally free as regards their nature and destiny. So right there. What is the one meaningful thing that you can do? Truly meaningful thing. Because everything else is perception. Everything else. And so this is what, because that's the only thing you can do, what the existentialists will say, therefore you can only affect you. That's as far as you can go. Nothing else. So you might as well create meaning. Number 4, what happens to a person at death? The highly wrought and tightly organized objective world stands over against human beings and appears absurd. What that means is, death appears absurd. That's why we make up religions. No one wants to deal with death. So we make up a religion, we make up an ending, that you can go to heaven, you can have nirvana, but that's absurd. So this would go back into the atheist idea that we're just annihilated, we're just back to the dust. And so this is where you get people that would be like, might as well not believe in God because it's absurd. Why is it possible to know anything at all? In full recognition of and against the absurdity of the objective world, the authentic person must revolt and create value. So even though the world's absurd, you got to say, no, I stand against your absurdity. Sounds like a little bit of pride. Sounds like maybe an angel that fell. He stood against the Creator and said, my way, not yours. There's a lot of parallels. There's a lot of parallels that you can draw in Satan and how he works and the things that we know about him through Scripture and the philosophical movements of the 19th and 20th and 21st centuries. It's crazy.
So with that statement saying that there is no value in objective.
So the subjective is more important.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do we know what is right and wrong? Moral absolutes are impossible. And this is why we're in our culture in an existential crisis. Where are we going to go in 10 years? You can almost say, pretty close, that what we're actually experiencing in our world right now, in our Western world and in Canada and the US, is actually a conflict between the postmodern and the modernist world. Who's going to win? I mean, think about this. If you're a modernist, borders matter, right? Because there's purpose, there's reasons. If you're a postmodernist, it doesn't matter. It's actually a narrative to oppress. So now you have a conflict. And everything that we're talking about in our society can fall under the modernist. There's laws, there's rule of law, purpose, meaning, and it's about oppression. And so it needs to be overthrown. And it can just be seen as the modern world really dealing with the postmodern world and deciding who will be the one that overcomes. And so it's one of those things. This is just an interesting way. What does it mean of human history? History is a linear stream of events linked by cause and effect, but without an overarching purpose except what you make it. Remember, you get to the nihilist and it doesn't mean anything. So you have to make it. You have to make what the purpose actually is. All right, so there is the atheist. Now let's look at the theistic. I want you to see the slight variation. Okay. The cosmos is composed solely of matter, but to human beings, reality appears in two forms: subjective and objective. You see any difference there?
No.
Nope. It's exactly the same. Why? Because they're both dealing with the existential crisis, right? So they're at the same point. That is true reality. That's why they share it, because they both agree that it's subjective and objective. Like that's where we're at. It appears in these two forms. So, but now we come to the next one. What is the nature of external reality? Human beings are personal beings who, when they come to full consciousness, they come to that nihilistic point, and they have that existential crisis, find themselves in an alien universe. This appears absurd. This appears weird. This doesn't appear right. Whether or not God exists is a tough question to be solved not by reason, but purely by faith. Now, the faith that they're talking about is not the same faith that the scriptures tell us. Faith that we're told in the scriptures is a trusting faith that sees what God has done and puts our hope into what he says. This faith is truly what's called blind faith. You just believe because you don't have another reason, another side. What is it called? Another option. There we go. Another option. You don't have another option. And so it's just blind faith. So what is a human being? The person is valuable. The personal is valuable. So I'm valuable. Are you valuable? I don't know. Because I don't know. Right? But I'm valuable. This goes back to Philosophy 101. I think, therefore I am. Because I'm valuable.
So only the individual is valuable.
Yeah, the person.
No one around
Yeah.
them is.
And that also, that then it gets extended through your religion. So the value of other people is an extension of your personal belief. This is why you can get very muddled. Because what if my belief system is that you're not valued? Then I can make you into a monster. I can call other people I say are valuable, and we can come out and we can war against you. That's why you see a lot of young people a part of these groups like Antifa. Because now they can war against you who are not valued that they are.
Yeah, I had no clue where they were coming from in that. I mean, I saw it.
Right.
I had no clue.
This isn't the rioters of the 1960s. Right? Because they're still in the modern worldview. At least struggling with it as the postmodern was coming in. What happens to a person at death? Because it's subjective, yeah, maybe you live with God. Or whatever that divine being that you have decided is true. That is the faith. Do you have anything to substitute that? Like, make that substantiated? No. Just what I believe. On Sunday, we're going to talk about actual reasons why you can believe. Like actual objective reasons. That would not fly with a postmodernist. Because it's your own value. That works for you, Jeremiah. Maybe it doesn't work for me. Okay. All right, number 5. Why is it possible to know anything at all? It's through faith. It's that blind faith. I just believe it. Well, why these two ideas conflict? Oh, because I believe. How can you believe in the Christian God? He says this. Oh, because I just don't believe those things. It's just a pick and choose. whatever you feel is good. That's what it is. And so that becomes an issue, right? Because now as a believer, you have to deal with this. I will tell you right now, this, as reaching out to people, I think this is harder to reach out to than an atheist.
Yeah.
Because you can't, yeah, it's delusional. Yeah. It's so hard when someone says, well, that's your truth and my truth. Like, that's hard. Because there's not, like, it's tons of prayer. It's a lot of allowing, it's literally giving them over. This is when Paul says in Romans 1, where God gives them over to a reprobate mind.
Yeah.
This is, I would say that the existential, theistic, and atheistic philosopher or mindset is that reprobate mind. Because there is absolute, like, you'll just run in circles and get driven mindless talking to someone that is at this point. It is so hard. This is why I can't have conversations with progressive Christians. Because they're at this point.
And the words don't mean the same thing.
Well, yeah, it's a,
Yeah.
yeah. Yep. It makes it so much harder. How do we know what right and wrong is? Through your faith. That's it. Yeah, but again, this is, you can change it. So it's not, Jesus says this. It's, I think Jesus is like this, therefore I'm going to agree with that. And so it's not, like, you can't be like, oh yeah, so they're going to follow what Jesus said. No, they're not. They're going to pick and choose what they want depending on their culture, what they desire, the political views, whatever that other things is. That's how they're going to make God into their own image. And then what does it mean of human history? History as a record of events is uncertain and it's unimportant. But history as a model or a type or myth to be made present and lived in is of supreme importance. So the myth of Jesus, that he was a loving teacher, that he embraced all people, that he would never hurt or never deny or require anything of you. That's important. The myth of Jesus is more important than the actual historical figure who walked the beaches of Galilee. That's why this is, like, I think this is the most dangerous of every single philosophy, every single worldview that we've talked about. I think existential theistic or theistic existentialism is the most dangerous and the most demonic. Because it's just I have decided I'm God. And that's one of the worst things. And I think this is where God's like slams people down and says, you want to play God? Let me show you how the real God works. And this is one of those things I pray when I encounter someone that fits this, I start praying, God, deliver them from this before you have to deal with them. And because it's not fun. What the Christian can take away from the existentialist. All right. There is meaning in this world. One cannot deny it. That's the whole purpose of existentialism. The struggle with meaning, right? I feel that there's meaning, but I say that there's not. So what do I have to do? I have to make it up. So the Christian can say, you know what? You're right that you cannot deny that there's meaning, or you mess up is thinking that you can create it. Because meaning comes from outside of you. Like, I mean, think about this. Why? How? You guys like cars? Like, okay. What's it really like? If you could have that one muscle car, what would it be? Or that car that you're like, man, when I was growing up, if I could have had that. What is that?
Mach 1.
What?
A Mach 1.
A Mach 1?
427 Ford Cobra.
Okay. You guys?
Same.
Volkswagen.
Close.
Like the old 57 Chevys.
Okay. Now let me ask you,
I just
why,
said.
why do those have meaning?
Grew up with it, I guess.
They grew up with it
I was around one, so.
growing up. Okay.
It was
Do you have one?
I had a Volkswagen, went to work.
Yeah. Says love the car.
I'm just retro. I
car.
like stuff before my time.
Okay.
Had a radio with music.
See, but I mean, let's step back and say, really, those cars are meaningless, right? I mean, they're just a car.
Yeah.
They rust.
They rusted. You had to work on them. You know, they're never as good as off the factory floor.
Took me to work.
But you gave it meaning, right? Because God, the reason we have meaning is because God gave us meaning. He says, I created you. Meaning comes from outside, it doesn't come from within. That's why we have a million different self-help books, and we still have an epidemic of anxiety and hurt and therapy that costs hundreds of dollars an hour, and yet you're there for 10 plus years and nothing ever gets fixed.
Yeah.
Is because you're trying to create meaning, and meaning comes from God himself. Once you get rid of him, there is no meaning. And so that's the thing. And helping someone realize that it's a long process. I had someone that came in one time, and they had been to therapy for years and years and years. And I told them, you don't need therapy. You need Jesus. Because you're looking everywhere else for meaning, and what you need is the one that calls you to meaning. And they're like, I've never heard that before. It's like, yeah, because in the world, they want you to just look inward, look inward, look inward. Christ says, look to me. It's a completely different way. How can the Christian reach out to existentialists? Okay, this is so important. I don't know if you've realized that. Under the postmodern worldview, living out godly lives are just, we have to do it. There can be, for the church, there can be no more of, we have church on Sunday and then I live however I want for the rest of the week. It's, my relationship with Jesus affects everything, and when I mess up, I'm honest with it. When I don't hide from sin, I say this is how it is, and I just deal with it. And if I have to deal with it in front of people, then I have to deal with it. I love the story of an old pastor, or he's a professor, and he had this young guy come up to him, and he says, how do I get to be like you? You seem to be sinless. He's like, I never see you get angry. I never see you get upset. You're just always just like Jesus, man. And he says, you know what? When I was your age, I went before the Lord and I said, Lord, deal with every sin that every single person can see. Like just everyone. Random people can see. He's like, that lasted for about 15 to 20 years. God was working on me. He's like, then, when I felt like God had really worked there, I asked him, Lord, I just want you to work on sin that just my family sees. Just the people who are closest to me. Only what they see. So that took another 15 to 20 years. He's like, right now, God is dealing with all the sins that you can't see. So I sin every day just like you do, but you'll never see it. Because that's it's purposeful sanctification. It's saying, I'm not going to say that I don't sin, because I would make God out to be a liar. But I am purposely seeking the Lord and cleansing me of all unrighteousness. Like, that's what we have to do. And when someone says something like, man, I thought you were a Christian, you go, you know, that's exactly why I'm a Christian. Because when I mess up, Jesus is good. He forgave me, and now he's working that out. And so it's things like that. It's not shying away from us being sinners. and then point back to God who gives worth through being created in His image. It's Jesus. This is why in our little mission statement that we have here at the church, it's we lift up the Lord, right? So love. Okay, God loves us, so we lift Him up in worship, and we point people to locate, or we locate people to point them back to Jesus, to His life. Yeah. Because that's the end goal, is always pointing back to Jesus. Not me, I'm not good, it's Jesus is good. No, I'm still a piece of work, Jesus is working on me. You know, it's always pointing back, because where they're pointing is here. Where we're pointing is that to Jesus. Like, it's Him. And so, again, it's a different dynamic. It's literally the exact opposite of what we're called to as Christians. So, all right. That is officially it.
We want more.
Yeah.
Oh, liar. Oh.
We got next year. That's taking everything and like actually putting it into practice.
So can you just explain that again?
Yeah, it's on video.
There you go.
But any last thoughts before we end?
So we were last year when we were here, we were down at Patty's. There was a young gentleman there that you talking about. They think that they're gods.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he was that religion because I tried to witness to him, and he was sitting there telling me, "Well, we are Jesus.
Right.
There is no Jesus. I'm Jesus. You're Jesus."
Right.
And I'm like,
Scary.
where in the world did you get this from?
Yeah.
It's like, and he was, yeah.
It's probably a mixture of New Age. So he's probably New Age.
He called it something that,
Christology.
yeah, or something. I don't know. It was-
Okay.
Anyway.
Yeah. Because there is a movement of like the Christ in you.
Mm.
Some churches, some progressive churches will actually teach that. That you just have to, what do they say, manifest the I am. And so the I am that's in you. So someone that reach out with that is, okay, so if you're Jesus, let's talk about the original Jesus. And let's see if like what you believe is what he believes. Like that's what I would do. Is like just challenge him, like, here's the original.
Yeah.
You're just a copy. So let's see if your copy matches the original.
Well, that's a good one.
The thing is, though, is what I thought I understood from him, though, is so there never was a Jesus. So there's no comparison to anything.
Okay.
And so that's where I was kind of,
Yeah. So I would then ask him, where'd you get the idea?
I wasn't quite that quick on my feet.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
One question, with all these kids roaming around through college and whatnot, and brilliant kids, how come they can't seem to understand, looking at the human body and trying to be told that, we evolved when you look at the human eye, how intricate it is? Why don't they understand?
Because they're not giving it. They're not being given information. So the big problem is with the educational system. Don't send kids to college. Is they're interested in giving this information and excluding all of this because they're not interested in that. They're interested in molding a certain type of person to then go out. And when you're in your 18 through 24, you are extremely malleable. Especially if you're being told, go and drink and do all these drugs. And then you come in and all you're hearing is from an authority figure that isn't like your parents. Right? Because your parents are the ones that are like, hey, you gotta get your room done. Hey, you gotta do this. You gotta do this. And now you're free. And you have a license. Literally, they're giving you this license to go and drink and to do drugs and to have as much sexual promiscuity as you want. I mean, there are literally, like on I read this book called Blue Light Jazz, and I can't remember their college, but it was up in Oregon, and they literally they shut down the whole week for the college, and it's just a party. Aren't you there to learn how to be a doctor or lawyer or whatever? No, you're there to be molded into a certain type of person, and that's why. Because they don't know. I mean, who here at 20 years old, 21 years old, thought, man, when I'm 50, I really need to get my act together, like I need to start now. Like, who invested when they're 18 years old for a retirement? We don't have the mind at that point.
Okay.
And so when we're being told by all these authority figures that all these years I've been wanting to do all this, stay out late, and my parents said no, they're the jerks. These people love me because they're letting me do whatever I want. And so when I go to their class, they're just reinforcing that. And when they get out, well, yeah, there's no God.
Spirit of the right, hate the child.
Yeah. And so I think that's the worst thing is, like education. Yeah, we all want education. We should all grow, but it's come to a place like ASU. They boast to be like the #1 business school in the country. They're also like one of the worst party schools. Texas Christian University, TCU, is like the #1 party school in the nation. It's a Christian school.
Oh,
Yeah. So, yeah, they interviewed this one guy, and he's like, "So where do you want to go?" He's like, "Well, I want to go to TCU because they have the loosest girls." Yeah.
that's stunning.
Yeah, it was some football player. But yeah, so that's what I think it is. So. Well, thank you guys for being like for 3.5 hours. Let's pray, and you guys can all go. Heavenly Father, thank you for this evening. I thank you for the grace of this group to allow me to get through this. Father, I pray for our youth, for those that are dealing with this nihilist, that even if they don't even understand it, they're being pushed and pulled and just beat up. And so, Father, I pray for them. I pray that your Holy Spirit would move in such a way that they wouldn't turn towards the existential where they just fall into another even worse state, but they would turn towards you and they would understand and embrace. And Father, I ask for Christians that we as believers would rise up to this need in our culture to stand firm in the Word and at the same time show compassion and holy lives. And so, Lord, I just ask for that. I pray for everyone in here that you would protect them, whether they're going to be here for a little bit or they're leaving this week. Lord, just be with them and bring us closer to you that we might worship you greater and that we would bow to you deeper. So, Lord, just thank you. We praise you. In the mighty name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Lord.